Many of those fleeing speak of new atrocities, accusing the Serbs of taking revenge on them for the rebels' attacks.
They took me from my wife and children at gunpoint, he said. I don't know where they are.
Soldiers of the parachute regiment walked me down into a basement room that bore the hallmarks of a torture chamber.
Knuckle dusters again?
Yeah. The ethnic cleansing goes on in Kosovo, and so it seems does NATO's inability to stop it.
Whatever the position you take on, whether it's right to use force or not, surely the one set of circumstances in which it must be justified is to prevent racial genocide.
2 American B-52 bombers circle overhead, searching for Serbian troops.
Let's get that gun in action. Let's get it gun in action now.
Yugoslav generals finally put their signatures tonight to a Kosovo peace deal.
Late this evening, NATO's commander here, General Sir Mike Jackson, emerged from a day and a half of talks with his Yugoslav counterparts. His announcement, peace is at hand.
I have some very good news.
Did you hear that the agreement was signed between NATO and the Yugoslav army that they were going to leave Kosovo? Good news, isn't it?
Good news.
Today we saw truckloads of Serb paramilitary thugs making their defiant exit through crowds of jeering Albanians. These are the very men accused of the ethnic cleansing that brought NATO into Kosovo.
At the border between Kosovo and Serbia proper, we found the Yugoslav army in full retreat, firing in the air to celebrate their exit from what has been the principal war zone.
Their parting shot was to torch the biggest mosque complex in Pristina.
And Robert, how difficult would you say the task is that is facing KFOR?
Well, I think it'll be an immensely chaotic environment they enter.
It will be even-handed towards the Serbs as well as to the Kosovars, but it will have very sharp teeth as well as very big teeth if anybody should try to threaten its personnel.
German troops have shot dead one Serb and seriously injured another.
A car is peppered with the bullets of NATO soldiers. It's German soldiers doing the shooting just hours after arriving in Kosovo on their first military occupation since World War II.
A second Serb gunman runs towards the Albanian, only to discover his target is holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. He beats a hasty retreat. British troops were on the scene in seconds. This is the Serb village of Glace, which we found this morning being comprehensively looted and burned by ethnic Albanians.
With the means that we have available to us, it's impossible to actually stop them setting fire to the buildings and removing the items.
More than 50,000 Serbs have already fled Kosovo. They left saying they didn't believe NATO's promises to protect them. Nothing that happened here today has proved them wrong.
The decision of the commander on the ground to avoid any danger to life and limb was to accept some destruction of property at the time.
NATO simply cannot deal with this. True, its soldiers arrest a few here and there, but the looting and burning is continuing daily, as are the murders.
Whatever it takes, Tony Blair again today in Albania, promising Kosovan refugees that NATO will get them home. His promise was echoed by the Foreign Secretary in the House of Commons, which is still debating the Balkan crisis as we speak. However, just how to get those refugees home seems to be causing strains within the alliance. Germany and Italy at odds with Tony Blair's apparent willingness to mount a ground offensive. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Gabby Rado examines now just how far NATO members are split.
The agonizing about how to end the Kosovo conflict goes on, not just across the Atlantic, but increasingly inside Europe. At one end of the spectrum is Tony Blair, who is visiting a refugee camp in Albania today. He's become something of a folk hero among the dispossessed of Kosovo, because regardless of the wobbliness inside the alliance, he insists on making promises which seem absolutely copper-bottomed.
These people have been driven from their homes and their homeland. Our mission is very simple and very clear. It is to make sure that they return to their homes and their homeland, to be able to live in peace and security, as should be the right of any civilized human being in our world.
Such undertakings appear to be highly risky, with Tony Blair putting his credibility on the line. After all, if the air campaign doesn't work, and there's little sign it's deterring President Milošević so far, NATO will have to invade. On that, Bill Clinton blows hot and cold. The French yesterday said it was very dangerous to talk of a ground offensive, and today the German and Italian leaders sounded so cautious it must have gladdened hearts in Belgrade. Gerhard Schröder today used the word unthinkable about the idea of a ground offensive to expel Serb forces from Kosovo. He would need Germany's lower house of parliament, the Bundestag, to approve sending soldiers into war, and he knows no majority exists for it. Italy's Massimo D'Alema has a more ambiguous line. He and Schröder want the UN to pass a resolution on a diplomatic deal, and when it does, he wants NATO to stop bombing. But if President Milošević rejects the UN resolution, Italy would be in favor of a ground offensive. The weakness of the let's wait for the Russians and the UN to get us out of the mess position appears to be this. There's no reason to imagine President Milošević will allow in the kind of multinational force NATO wants if he thinks the alliance won't actually invade. And if the force is the kind he wants, the refugees will never go back.
We have reports that Serb forces have burned bodies exhumed from mass graves in an attempt to destroy forensic evidence. The number of individuals that we have a fairly firm count on as having been killed in mass executions has now risen to 5,000. I must emphasize that is a totally minimalist figure.
The trouble is, can NATO really deliver its promise of justice for the victims? There's a growing disparity between the loud, clear warnings to Yugoslavia that a final day of reckoning will come, and the lack of clarity among Western leaders of how they will in fact bring about that day.
So this is Kosovo.
Escorted by Kosovo Liberation Army fighters, we walked into Kosovo, and the sound of war was all around us. They took us to a frontline base recently captured from the Serbs. The fighting is taking place in the hills close by, and the KLA is desperate to defend the small amount of territory it's gained. The unit commander claimed 3 Serbs had been killed in the last 24 hours. He had taken us inside Kosovo to show us their successes. This was a Serb headquarters, he said, captured and destroyed by his men. They want to refute Serb claims that they've been defeated.
Yes.
But these are not new battlefield victories, and the biggest problem for the KLA is that they lack the heavy weapons to make real progress against the formidable Yugoslav army.
These KLA fighters are claiming success in at least 3 attacks against Serb forces in the past 48 hours. But the truth is they will make little headway against a powerful army without continued and heavy NATO bombing.
Why is your weapon shooting bloody seagulls?
On a hillside just a few miles from the fighting, we found the KLA's raw recruits being trained by a British volunteer. A former soldier in the British Army, John Harrison, claims he's unpaid, that he's here for the cause, not for the money, but says only NATO ground troops can win the battle for Kosovo.
Over!
We've got no tanks. We've got no heavy artillery. The only things we've got is what we can carry in our arms.
Many of these young fighters will be killed in this war, but that is a sacrifice many are prepared to make.
I'm coming to fight. It's a pleasure I die for my country.
They sing the songs of Kosovo, but they also know full well that the immediate fate of their homeland is out of their hands. Mark Austin, ITN, with the KLA, inside Kosovo. For more than a month, 9-year-old Ardita Chitaku and her 4-year-old sister Mirieta have been trying to survive without the most important person in their life. They lost their mother as they fled in panic from Kosovo. The only person to look after them in this refugee camp is their 88-year-old grandmother. This is how we found Ardita and Mirieta 34 days ago when they emerged from Kosovo. They were sitting by the road, crying in the freezing rain. They'd been walking for 3 days, said the grandmother. Since then, we've been trying to trace their mother in the refugee camps of Albania. And today, we finally found her. We showed her the front page of a local newspaper carrying the story of her lost children and a picture of Ardita. Ahead, a 6-hour drive across Albania for Shamila and her baby son, for a reunion neither mother nor children thought would ever happen.
The authorities here want to close these camps to move the refugees further south for their own safety. But thousands of families torn apart by the war want to stay right here, in the hope of a reunion, just like this one. But today, in one family at least, mother and children are back together again. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
Robin Cook's message on this visit to the US capital is a simple one. Don't lose your nerve, don't allow any let-up in the bombing. We must win at all costs. But while he's being politely received, there are the first signs that the Americans are tiring somewhat of British hawkishness, that they're unwilling to be bounced by the British into a ground invasion of Kosovo. A report in the New York Times detailed a 90-minute phone call between Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, in which the president is reported to have asked the Prime Minister to please get control of the hawks in his cabinet. It's a report that Robin Cook vigorously denied to me this morning.
Is there any truth in this?
Absolutely none. There was absolutely no such suggestion from the president. Yes, there was a long conversation. There are no two closer allies in the alliance than the United States and the United Kingdom, and that's partly why I'm here, to show that common resolve and unity.
Obviously, there are discussions. These are 19 democracies, and we are all talking with each other, but the goals are firm, the conditions are clear, and we will prevail.
But the PR offensive can't change the fact that in this city there's a growing feeling that something must be done to end the war, that if there's no military breakthrough, there must be a diplomatic one. Add to that a growing emphasis on diplomacy in some European capitals, and Britain's position is beginning to look somewhat isolated. James Mates, ITN, Washington.
Another own goal for NATO, hitting the ragtaggle Kosovo Liberation Army, the Western Alliance's only presence on the ground in the war-torn province. Today, NATO admitted responsibility for the attack.
Indeed, we did strike that border command post. It was until very recently in the hands of the Yugoslav army, but it appears that it was then subsequently taken over by the UCK. So I'm not aware. I've seen reports, but I can't confirm any number of casualties. But let me be clear, if we had known in a very dynamic situation, particularly where the UCK is extremely active in that part, that it had been captured by the UCK, then it would have been taken off the target list.
And yet the Kasari barracks had been visited by a number of Western TV crews in the last month. ITN's own Mark Austin was there just a week ago. The KLA liked to take journalists there to show them how they were regrouping and gathering strength. There was even an ex-British serviceman training the rebels. This attack comes amid growing criticism of NATO's targeting strategy, including the biggest blunder of all, the destruction of the Chinese embassy. That time, the best excuse NATO could come up with was that they'd been using outdated maps of Belgrade.
Adjust and 5 effect on Uniform Delta 6300, grid 580815. Altitude 455, direction
happy
6400.
They are free, but they still walk like prisoners. They are men emerging from hell, and it is a pitiful sight. All these men have been held in a Serb prison for several weeks. All say they were beaten, and today there was ample evidence. Many were bruised and clearly in pain. This man said his ribs were broken during regular beatings by the Serbs. But his real concern was for his family. They took me from my wife and children at gunpoint, he said. I don't know where they are, or even if they're alive. Despite their suffering, they are now safe, but their families may not be. It is the anguish of not knowing that is too much to bear. Evidence too today that young teenagers are among those being held by the Serbs. This boy is 16 and told us there are those even younger than himself left behind in the prison.
But just as these men have been released by the Serbs, so a couple of hours ago, across this border, came 1,000 women and children who said their men had been taken. They told us they were from a village near the town of Prizren. They'd had to walk 12 miles to the border. They were separated from husbands and fathers when they were forced from their homes by Serb police. The ethnic cleansing goes on in Kosovo, and so it seems does NATO's inability to stop it. And so another truckload of human misery heads towards Albanian refugee camps already too full to cope. And these people say there are still many more thousands to come. In the camps, doctors are now examining the released men and say many are malnourished. The men say they were subjected to physical and mental torture, deprived of sleep and food.
Some bread, a little bread, and water. And every time we went to eat, they beat us.
War crimes investigators from Britain are flying here specifically to question these men. Their release has caused emotional turmoil in the camps as desperate mothers and daughters wait in hope. Lamturi Ambiti is looking for her father, who was taken by the Serbs in the town from where the men are now arriving. At the border, as evening draws in, she spots her uncle. He tells her her father has been badly beaten while in prison. But he's coming, he said. He's coming right behind me. And suddenly, he is there. It is a rare reunion, and his wife and 4 other children remain in Kosovo, where the families of most of these men are. And tonight, all they can do is wait. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
NATO claimed today that its military campaign against the Serbs had reached a decisive turning point. It now plans to double the number of ground troops ready to go into Kosovo and said they would have big, sharp teeth. Robert Moore reports.
This evening's decision by NATO to nearly double the number of troops heading to the Balkans is designed to maximise pressure on President Milošević. It is also intended to give NATO commanders on the ground additional military options. But the reality is that even when the force does double to around 50,000 NATO troops, it will still be capable only of policing a deal. A forced invasion of Kosovo against the Yugoslav army would require an even more dramatic deployment of troops and armour. The new flow of reinforcements, codenamed Operation Joint Guardian, will have to be provided for by NATO countries, and it's designed only as a neutral peacekeeping army.
It will be even-handed towards the Serbs as well as to the Kosovars. It will be constructive and cooperative, but it will have very sharp teeth as well as very big teeth if anybody should try to oppose it, carrying out its mandate or to threaten its personnel.
NATO's Supreme Commander wants the new bolstered force deployed rapidly. In reality, it will take many weeks to assemble. At the same time, NATO received welcome backing from the Spanish Prime Minister José María Aznar, who voiced strong support for the current air campaign. NATO now begins the search for the additional troops and armour to send to the Balkans, and their mission remains unclear. Is the new force designed to police a peace deal or launch a land invasion?
Robert Moore, ITN, at the Foreign Office.
The British have once again proved themselves to be the most gung-ho of the NATO allies, offering up a further 12,000 troops to a future peace implementation force in Kosovo. And these troops are not just the sort that build bridges. They have teeth too, which will allow NATO to keep all its options open. There are already over 5,000 British troops in Macedonia, including 2 battle groups backed up by artillery, engineers and logistics personnel. They could be joined by the 12,000 now on standby. That includes 3 infantry battalion groups, 3 brigade headquarters and 2,000 Royal Marine Commandos. At the moment there's a total of 14,000 NATO troops on the ground. This could be raised to a staggering 60,000, of which almost a third will be British.
Although these aren't the heavy troops of the Cold War, these are very able troops, and it really does demonstrate that they are building up a core which can either be used for peace implementation or be used in something slightly more nasty, what they're calling at the moment a benign environment with rough edges.
But the substantial British contribution to a peacekeeping force in Kosovo will be reduced after 6 months. That much was made clear this afternoon, with troops also deployed in Bosnia, the Falklands and Northern Ireland. The British Armed Forces will be stretched to their limits.
He may not be able to leave Yugoslavia without being arrested, but President Milošević, meeting the former Greek Prime Minister Konstantin Mitsotakis this morning, is determined not to be excluded from the diplomatic process deciding Kosovo's future. Mr. Mitsotakis, who describes himself as an old friend of the Yugoslav president, told me that Mr. Milošević avoided the issue of the indictment when he raised it in the meeting this morning. He himself saw it just as a problem.
It was stupid. The effect will be negative, but I hope it will be not a disaster. Milošević will continue the discussion, and if a political solution is possible, I think he will be prepared to accept.
The official attitude seems to be, so what? The theme of today's government press conference was lies and videotape, an attempt to prove that a video obtained by CNN detailing a massacre in Kosovo was nothing of the sort. Talking through an interpreter, the government spokesman described the Hague Tribunal as a private court set up by the US administration.
The NATO Tribunal, or better yet, the Hague Tribunal, is a specific inquisition court used by the US to obliterate sovereignty and the constituted order in other countries that they do not like.
There's been no outward public reaction, but opposition supporters fear that the indictments leave Mr. Milošević and his close circle with nothing to lose, no incentive to compromise. With Viktor Chernomyrdian's visit delayed and bombing continuing, people fear that they, rather than President Milošević, are going to suffer.
I think this will be a serious blow and to negotiated and quick solution. This will only serve to prolong this conflict, and it's really undermining the role of Russia as international mediator. This is the declaration now of the war against Milošević himself, and I can imagine, knowing the way he acted before, that he's going to fight up until the end.
People I've spoken to here today see the indictments as another weapon in NATO's arsenal. They think that this shows that NATO wants to fight on. It gives President Milošević less room for manoeuvre and means that he'll have to fight on too. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Belgrade. It is impossible to talk peace with bombs falling, wrote the Russian mediator Viktor Chernomyrdian in yesterday's Washington Post. Yet more bombs fell on Belgrade last night, disabling 2 power distribution stations, and NATO says it won't stop. Most of Belgrade was without electricity again last night, and it's increasingly difficult for the electrical company to restore the power. Mr. Chernomyrdian arrived in Belgrade this morning to see President Milošević. He said unless the air raid stops soon, he would recommend Russia withdraw from the negotiating process. He told waiting reporters that there is some agreement between Russia, Europe and the USA, and he would meet the American and European mediators again after Belgrade. But here, people are pessimistic.
I think the chances are now increasing that Russia may withdraw from the negotiations, because it is not, I haven't seen, after 2 months of bombing, I have not seen a single instance where something Russians were demanding was accepted. Not only that, when Chernomyrdin comes to Belgrade, there is usually an increase in bombing, which I think he finds personally insulting, and I think many Russians do.
The oil refinery at Novi Sad, north of Belgrade. It's been hit 11 times since the bombing started, most recently last Monday. The damage to Yugoslavia's military remains hidden, so it's hard for people here to assess their government's position. Instead, they count the cost they can see and wait.
We will be faced with all economic troubles in the future, for sure. But nowadays we are thinking how to survive, how to make, let's say, to save as much as it is possible, and to save ecological system of our town and our region.
The bridges across the Danube at Novi Sad were also destroyed when the bombing began. People have grown used to taking the ferry across instead and speculating about just how long the war might last.
Maybe 1 year or 2 years.
That long?
Why not? Every war in these countries or on Balkan longs about 4 years. 4 years.
Novi Sad is somewhere where they really feel the war, with the bridges broken and having to travel by ferry, and people here know that it's going to cost millions of pounds to repair this place. They want a diplomatic solution quickly, but at the moment it looks further off than ever. Lindsay Hilson, Channel 4 News, Novi Sad.
Kosovo's war edges ever closer to Albania. The country's army put on a show of force today, a warning to the Serbs who've been occupying strips of Albania, but proof too that this country is slowly being sucked into a wider war.
This is just an exercise, but this tank and rocket fire can be heard inside Kosovo, just a few miles away, by the Serbs, who are now engaged in their own ground war against the Kosovo rebels.
This is not an exercise. The Serbs pounding Kosovo's rebels with mortar and gunfire. A battle that's lasted for days, just yards from Albania, as refugees pour across the border here, the shells and bullets flying overhead. Many of those fleeing speak of new atrocities, accusing the Serbs of taking revenge on them for the rebels' attacks. The Serbs just killed my daughter, this woman says. She was handicapped. Then they burned our house with her body inside. This man describes how the Serbs mutilated their victims. All this in the last 2 days. And again today, more men the Serbs imprisoned reached Albania with tales of beatings and the bruises to prove it. Their families had feared they were dead. They feared every day they'd be shot.
How you were treated by the Serbs, what happened to you?
Like an animal, what else I can tell?
What did they do?
I don't know how to explain, but whatever they have on their minds, they done to me. Everything, everything.
Bayram Bachiri's daughter was sure the Serbs had killed him. His mother too. She'd watched the Serb police take him away. She collapsed, seeing him again. But she has another son held by the Serbs inside Kosovo. The agony here is far, far from over. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border. The village of Planea, 2 miles inside Kosovo. All day it has been targeted by NATO planes. The dust rises, and when it settles, the jets attack again. In 2 hours, I counted around 20 strikes on the village, and then many more, the planes rising and diving regularly, emitting flares and an eerie noise. Before the bombs fell, not once did I hear the Serbian anti-aircraft guns fire back. The Serbs dug into this village weeks ago. They had fuel and munitions here. The NATO planes were clearly visible on their attack run. Watch the third house from the right, which appears to be deliberately targeted. And clearly visible too in slow motion, first one missile and then a second, speeding to their target.
This is the heaviest fighting yet on this border. The Serbs are by no means surrounded, but they're now being attacked from two sides. From the front by the Kosovo rebels, and from behind in a now intense series of air raids by NATO warplanes.
All day, the Kosovo rebels have been trying to take the same village. The Serbs hitting them for hours with heavy mortar and artillery fire. The rebels bringing in their casualties by the hour, filling the ward of a makeshift hospital with the dead and injured. And through this gauntlet came more refugees, most happy to see NATO pounding those who've expelled them. The bombs fell from 15,000 feet to right and left, bomb by bomb in the village of Planea and in the fields and roads around it. NATO is clearing a path for the rebels to advance. It had all the appearance of a coordinated attack. In late afternoon, NATO struck just yards from Albania, targeting bombs on the Serbian border post. Dozens of refugees were crossing at this moment, Serbian sniper and mortar positions the apparent target, ending a day of massive and sustained attack. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
The morning rush hour in Brussels, and Jamie Shea on his way to NATO headquarters is already in full flood, mixing French literature, Balkan politics and family gossip.
My son's basic question, and Dad, is when is this war going to be over so that we can play football again on a Saturday?
He was NATO's spokesman for 6 quiet years before this all started, and his present fame has come as a shock. He's London born and bred, the son of an East End mechanic. He got a first-class degree in history and French and was an academic before joining NATO.
Here we go. Bonjour Véro, chez ITN Télé avec moi aujourd'hui.
For now, he works 7 days a week, gathering in the latest information from NATO's different sections.
Bruce, good morning, it's Jamie here. Bruce, anything about the overnight operations that we've got already? Oh, what, really bad weather?
He says what he does is to provide facts while trying to keep public support behind NATO. He doesn't deny subtle manipulation.
It all depends what you mean by manipulate, I suppose. Do I tell lies? Of course not, because I'm very bad at that, and my experience of journalists is they're very fast at discovering lies, and your credibility would be gone forever. But do I try to come up with what I consider to be the convincing arguments? Yes, I do, obviously.
His day is crammed with meetings and calls. Spare time to read comes as he walks NATO's long corridors from conference to conference. And this is where people hijack him for an opinion or his help. One of these officials is from the British Embassy in Paris.
At the 1600 meeting yesterday on strategy.
The first public briefing is in the morning. On these occasions, Shea has been accused of wrapping up unpalatable truths in military jargon.
You sit here essentially in comfort talking about smart bombs, talking about the technology, but it bears no relationship to the reality on the ground, which is really mangled people.
Well, that, again, I think is somewhat unfair. We are in this because there are hundreds of thousands of mangled lives in Kosovo. Let's not forget this. The problem, of course, is that these images are not on TV as often as the images of the casualties from NATO strikes.
Shea is now late for a meeting of NATO's ambassadors. Waiting outside is the American general in charge of this war.
I think Jamie Shea's doing a great job.
Thank you.
And we're all proud of him.
Not a view shared by journalists who spent time in Belgrade.
In an odd, crazed sort of way, this whole press conference, press briefing thing is rather like a kind of seedy nightclub. He's the club doorman, with always a general or an air commodore to run the place as a club manager to promise you more horrors tomorrow. I think it's a very sinister thing, the way these briefings go on and what they say.
Upstairs, the Secretary-General, Javier Solana, gives Shea some quick advice before the next press briefing.
I think it should be okay today.
Don't get in too much.
No. I'm afraid I'm going to keep it very short.
For the past 70 days, this has been the public face of NATO, sometimes slow with the facts, but it's a performance that NATO's credibility depends on. And Shea knows there will be no final curtain for him until the war is over. Joe Andrews, ITN, Brussels.
Good evening. For 10 weeks now, this programme has reported the effects of the conflict in Kosovo. The dispossessed refugees and burned villages on one side, the bridges and power stations destroyed by NATO on the other. Tonight we have a first-hand account of what it's like to be under the bombs, some of the most dramatic pictures of the war. Our Europe correspondent Bill Neely was in a group of reporters in the front line of a NATO attack inside the Albanian border.
Warplanes in combat above Albania and now for the first time hitting Albania itself. Albania is NATO's ally. It has now also become NATO's target. The first evidence came this morning. Bunkers a few hundred yards inside Albania bombed. Deep craters nearby. The debris of missiles bearing US markings reading laser seeker and fin-guided bomb. On a live ITN broadcast, I showed this evidence and described the NATO jets above.
Well, you can't hear it, but there are plenty of NATO planes really circling or moving in above us all the time.
30 minutes later, the jets struck where we'd been standing.
That was clearly a warplane which swooped down and hit here just a few seconds ago, and we're about to leave because there is a chance that it will come again.
And it did. By now we had driven half a mile away, about a dozen journalists scattering as the bombs fell. But again, the warplanes came. We could see the planes clearly, some of them American A-10 Warthogs. 5 minutes on, and as Albanian villagers evacuate their homes, another strike deeper still into Albania. Once again we fled, once again the planes came. This time we filmed from inside the armoured vehicle. Fearing our cars were attracting the planes, we stayed out, and the planes came back. Amid it all, refugees running the gauntlet of a bombing run. Why are NATO bombing Albania, he says. They should be hitting the Serbs in Kosovo.
We've now had 5 strikes here in about half an hour. The NATO planes, I can hear them above me, still circling, searching for targets. And in my mind, there is absolutely no doubt that the planes that have targeted us are from NATO.
Some days as a journalist, or as anyone else caught up in this war, you have to count yourself lucky. And today I do, because today we were all caught up in the targeting of Albania. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
And tonight I spoke to Bill Neely in Albania. Bill, it must have been a terrifying business for you.
Well, it was terrifying to have planes attacking us in broad daylight. The noise as the missiles screeched in above us was absolutely terrifying, and the first impact was really very, very close indeed. After that, it was just a question of either running or driving as far away as possible, but we still knew that the planes were above us, circling and searching for the target, and we knew at one point the target had been us. At one point I was hit on the leg by a piece of flying rock, but it could have been so very much worse. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that was flying around. Shrapnel, bits of bomb, some of this incredibly jagged and red hot at the time that it was flying through the air. So it was really astonishing that no one was more seriously injured.
How on earth could NATO planes have ended up doing something like this?
Well, it's a question I would very much like to ask NATO myself. They targeted the same area yesterday in low light, but today it was absolutely clear. The pilots had circled around for hours. They could quite clearly see us. They had targeted very precisely yesterday. So why did it happen? There is the possibility, of course, that NATO did this deliberately, but I certainly think NATO has some questions to answer. Why did it target a country and people in it which has been its staunchest ally in this region, and indeed a country where many of its own troops are based?
Bill Neely in Albania, thank you. And the ITN team with Bill Neely were Eric Fuchs, Fred Nirak and Ben Scotchbrook. Well, NATO said tonight it was still investigating that incident. Also tonight, the commander of Yugoslav forces in Kosovo said their losses, despite all the NATO airstrikes, had been minimal, less than 1%. And it was confirmed that tomorrow will see the first meeting between President Milošević and the West since the bombing started.
Good evening. It looks as if the Kosovo conflict is going to be over soon. After 10 weeks of NATO bombing, the Yugoslav president, Slobodan Milošević, and the Serbian parliament said today that they accepted the terms conveyed by EU and Russian envoys yesterday. However, Tony Blair and the West are still sceptical, and until there's clear evidence of Serb compliance, the bombing will continue. These are the main requirements of the peace plan. Proof of an end to violence and withdrawal of all Serb forces from Kosovo, the deployment in Kosovo of an international security presence under unified command, and the safe return of the refugees. The EU envoy, Martti Ahtisaari, has tonight been briefing EU leaders in Cologne. ITN's Robert Moore reports from there.
Early this evening, with the European leaders anxiously waiting for his assessment, the President of Finland swept into Cologne. He had come straight from Belgrade and was received here rather like a hero returning from the battlefield. And this evening, as world leaders hungrily devoured the news of the peace deal, it appears that NATO has won this particular battle. The text of the deal is close to the West's core demands. It specifies the total withdrawal of Serb forces from Kosovo. Although there remains here in Cologne a sense of caution, President Ahtisaari suggested the bombing could end imminently.
It would be in days, and very few days, that I understand that the suspension of the war activities, in other words, the pause in the bombing, would take place. So you can calculate yourself. I'm in no position to say whether it's 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, but it's a very short period of time.
The EU summit has been entirely overtaken by events flowing from Yugoslavia. The stakes could scarcely be higher, with NATO and EU credibility clearly on the line. Through the day, as reports filtered from Belgrade, there was clear tension. Mr. Blair looked visibly surprised and anxious at one point. Though tonight he welcomed the emergence of a deal, but carefully avoided talking of victory for NATO or of surrender for Belgrade. The concern is it could yet be a trick.
We've got, as I say, we've got to wait to make sure that this is properly tied down now, because words aren't enough. There's got to be actions that follow from that. But if we have managed to bring him to this point, and we do succeed in getting those refugees back, there is no doubt at all in my mind as to what has produced it. It is that NATO unity, our total resolve, and our total determination to do what is necessary to see justice done.
As they pose for the traditional summit pictures, what the EU leaders appear most satisfied with is that under the deal it looks like NATO will enter Kosovo unopposed and will not even see, let alone fight, Serb troops. The Western alliance will be the unambiguous authority in the province and will be able to shepherd back the frightened refugees before winter sets in. Tonight, European leaders are still gathered here, still assessing the day's dramatic diplomatic developments. They're now expecting a rapid withdrawal of all Serb forces from Kosovo, and only when that is visible and verifiable will NATO finally suspend the airstrikes. Tonight, then, an anxious wait begins to see if the deal struck in Belgrade by President Ahtisaari will lead to the start of the withdrawal and to an end to the Kosovo War. Robert Moore, ITN, Cologne.
Tonight, President Clinton gave his cautious response to today's developments. Like the other NATO leaders, he said he needed to know that President Milošević would actually carry out the peace plan.
Movement by the Serbian leadership to accept these conditions, established by NATO and the international community, is of course welcome. But based on our past experience, we must also be cautious. First, we must have clarity that the Serbian leadership has fully accepted these conditions and intends to fully implement them. Until then, and until Serb forces begin a verifiable withdrawal from Kosovo, we will continue to pursue diplomacy, but we will also continue the military effort that has brought us to this point.
Well, like any war, there are the occasional intense bursts of activity, but most of the time the foot soldiers here just sit around and wait.
They are, of course, waiting for news, and that news comes from just one source, the voice of NATO, Jamie Shea, but he's running late. So, in the meantime, I get a tour of the press room from Turkish correspondent Nazlı Ertan.
This is more or less the British constituency. The BBC has not changed places ever since he sat down. The radios are basically over here. CNN has its own base over there with their own computer, which is a rarity here. And in the far end of the room is what we call the Balkanic Peninsula. Most of the Greeks, some of the Albanian journalists are always there.
Jamie's turned up for the 11 a.m. off-camera briefing, and we're not even allowed to film his arrival.
Off-camera in the morning. I know that, but you can't film it then. That's what off-camera means. In there, it's off-camera. No. The morning's off-camera. We won't bring him down here then. And you can tell your correspondent.
We're being told off by Jonathan Prince. He's one of President Clinton's speechwriters, drafted in as part of a team of behind-the-scenes spin doctors.
It's just not fair.
You see them sort of hovering on the edges of the press conferences here. They didn't try to steal the limelight from Jamie Shea, but they fed him a lot of information, and I think they also have tried on occasion to sort of define the line of the day.
And indeed, here is the New York Times correspondent after the 11 a.m. briefing getting some extra White House spin. Meanwhile, outside, the BBC's defence correspondent is preparing to do his 802nd live appearance since the war began. So was he worried about being seen as a NATO mouthpiece?
NATO is more truthful than the Serbs. So if you are asked your opinion about whether something is factually accurate, then NATO is factually accurate most of the time. So that makes it even harder to distinguish yourself from NATO.
A couple of final questions for
Beamed around the world by satellite TV, the crucial 3 p.m. briefing is where the spin doctors hope to get their message across. As usual, Jamie's armed with a pithy quote.
And I always like to quote from Frederick the Great, my mentor here. You know, he said, "Diplomacy without arms is like music without instruments." Jake.
While the journalists, with their customised screensavers, digest and send out NATO's latest message, Jamie is back in his office.
Every day they do a kind of summary, and so it's just a way of testing if the message has got across or not.
Here in Brussels, NATO's reaction has been that it supports this diplomatic initiative. Matthew, thank you.
Okay, sorry for that.
Right.
No, I think today we got it over. That's good. You're visiting me on one of the better days, hopefully.
It's not always that easy, because no matter how good the spin, journalists are notorious for not doing what they're told. But believe him or not, there's no doubt that the NATO spokesman, born in Hackney, has become a star, pursued even by autograph hunters. And when it's all said and done, it's been a good war for Jamie Shea.
Don't laugh.
In the streets, where details are slowly beginning to spread, I found relief that the war may be over, mingled with resignation.
This bombing was a catastrophe for everyone. People here and the country, whole country.
But in fact, the terms of the agreement are that the Serbian army and police have to leave Kosovo. What do you think about that?
I think only about bombing because of my children and whole children in this country.
The crash, as their mother spoke, was the sonic boom of a NATO jet overhead. Nearby was the former US Cultural Center, smashed and daubed with slogans. But the rubbish collector taking a rest there was not in a militant mood.
Who knows if it was worth it or not? Nobody can be sure of anything. We don't understand why it started or what is happening now.
Some democratic opposition politicians are denouncing what they call the government's surrender, but their ability to spread their message is limited.
Mr. Milošević is afraid of losing his power, losing power of his party and the whole regime, and he's not able, he doesn't want to recognize that he was defeated.
But can he hold on to power in the face of the soldiers coming back and the truth gradually spreading?
It's a questionable. At the long run, Mr. Milošević will not be able to stay in saddle.
In spite of the unfavorable terms on which President Milošević is now apparently making peace, the signs are that he may well be able to ride out the immediate political crisis. The full facts about the withdrawal of the Serbian army and police from Kosovo will gradually become known. But as one observer told me, Serbia's tragedy is that the truth always comes out too late. Julian Mannion, ITN, Belgrade.
I can't. You're right.
A more relaxed mood in Cologne today, but as the constant phone calls and consultations made clear, the details of the Kosovo deal are still being worked out. Belgrade's sudden change of heart seems to have caught the leaders by surprise, and now they have to move quickly to get a UN resolution in place and a 50,000-strong force into Kosovo.
We know there is a lot more work to be done as we translate diplomatic agreement into military reality on the ground. Until there is a verifiable withdrawal of Milosevic's troops, the air campaign goes on. There can be no question of ending it until we are clear that these demands are being met in reality. We will not trust Milosevic's word. We have had enough experience of him breaking it. We will judge him rightly on actions.
But French President Jacques Chirac said NATO should now rein back its operation and concentrate solely on military targets. NATO's spokesman seemed to agree.
We are doing what is necessary to keep pressure up on Belgrade and so that they understand that they must follow through rapidly with the implementation of what they agreed to yesterday. We will keep up only as much pressure as we deem necessary on them so that they realise this. But the military targets have always been, always will be, military targets, nothing more than that.
And then the leaders have to decide when and how the international force go into Kosovo. If the alliance is to live up to its promise of allowing Kosovars home before winter, then it'll have to move fast. So, who will provide the troops for the security force? NATO has said the force, known as KFOR, will have around 48,000 troops. The NATO part will be led by Britain's Lieutenant General Michael Jackson and will include 19,000 from Britain, 7,000 from America and 6,000 from France, which leaves another 16,000 troops to come from Russia and other UN countries. But who's going to be in charge? Gerhard Schröder said NATO and Russia would work together.
The principle of a single command structure has been accepted by all sides.
But the Russians don't see it that way, insisting that their troops won't go under NATO control. 24 hours on then from the Kosovo deal, it's clear that many details still need to be thought through. Peter Morgan, Channel 4 News, Cologne.
NATO says it will keep on bombing, and its planes are still circling. And the Serbs are still shelling. Peace has a long way to go. So 100,000 refugees, 10 miles from Kosovo, watch and listen. And distrust Mr. Milošević.
All Albania not believe him anymore.
And why not?
Because many times he said, yes, I agree with you, and later make what he wants.
President Milošević signed a peace agreement last year to pull most of his troops out of Kosovo. It took him about 8 weeks to break it. Most of these people think he's nothing but a murderer. They don't believe a single word he says.
All of them will say no, because the man who kills, rapes, murders, makes massacres of civilian people, you can't believe them.
You can't trust President Milošević?
No, in no way.
So they won't be starting up their tractors and heading for Kosovo. Not for a long time.
With NATO troops, we will back in Kosovo.
But not before then?
No, never.
Only NATO troops, they say, can guarantee their safety there. Until then, the UN will feed them and shelter them in the camps through the winter if need be.
You have to remember what these people have lived through, the kind of fear that is built up in them, and that has to be eliminated before people will be ready to go back.
So they will stay, some in squalor, like these families in a disused factory. Life remains nasty and short here. Kosovo's rebels burying their dead today. They don't trust the deal, and they will keep their guns. And the refugees will keep their camps and cling to their guarded hopes that this deal can bring them peace and bring them home.
I think that he knows from what has happened that we are deadly serious, total in our resolve and determination, and that if he did start to play around with the agreement, then he would meet a very swift response. So I believe that he recognizes that. But of course, I mean, you're right, you can't trust a man like that, and we have to make sure that it is now implemented.
there should be an immediate stop to the bombing, that he should be given basically the chance to prove himself. Isn't there a case for saying that, given particularly how important the Russians have been to the diplomatic effort?
The Russians have been immensely important, and I paid tribute to them, but it can stop very quickly with the verifiable withdrawal. I mean, he should start to get his troops out of Kosovo, and when that begins in a credible and verifiable way, then the bombing will stop.
You talked at the very start of a force with NATO at its core. Is the man in charge going to be a NATO general who in turn commands the Russian troops on the ground?
We've always been aware of the sensitivities of the Russians in respect of their forces being under formal NATO command. We understand that. We've taken account of those sensitivities in other areas, and we will do so again, and I'm sure we can find a way round that. But it has to have a NATO core, this force, and it has to have a unified chain of command.
But will it have a NATO general at its head?
Well, I'm not going to say who's going to be the general, but if it's got a NATO core, there will be somebody who is able to command the forces, which will be substantial NATO forces.
But if it's to have a unified command structure, doesn't that then mean he'll have to be able to give orders to the Russians?
Well, as I say, we have worked this out and dealt with it in separate arrangements, in other sets of circumstances, and we'll do that again now. And I'm sure whatever NATO general it is will be able to work with his Russian counterparts in order to ensure that's the case. What there mustn't be is any de facto partition of Kosovo. There's no question of having one sector which is under one command and another sector under a different command, and the two sectors having nothing to do with each other. That's not the case.
You promised to the refugees in the camp that you would get them back safely. But one of their biggest worries, obviously, is that Milošević is still in charge in Yugoslavia. How can they have the confidence to go back while he is still in charge?
We will have an international force there that will protect them. There is a civil administration that will be there effectively under international supervision. And, of course, it is right to say that whilst Milošević is still in power, the region is less safe, less stable. Most important of all, for people in Serbia, they don't have a future as part of the international family of nations with Milošević still in charge.
What does that mean in real terms?
Let me put it in blunt terms. We are going to undertake a big reconstruction, regeneration program for the Balkans. I want this to be a turning point in the Balkans. I want them to know that we're offering them a future based not on ethnic conflict, but on cooperation for peace, for stability, for security. Only a democratic Serbia can be part of that, and a democratic Serbia can be part of it, but not a Serbia led by Milošević. I mean, his tactics in this have been extremely crude, utterly brutal, and utterly predictable. And when you're dealing with someone like that, the only language they understand is force, and it's a terrible thing. I mean, I tried for months to get this thing sorted out peacefully. I was, when people describe me as a hawk in this, I was a dove for months before this, saying, come on, let's get back into negotiations. It's a huge undertaking, this, give the man a chance to do the right thing. But then when they began that process of ethnic cleansing in earnest, days before a NATO bomb ever fell, we had to act. If we hadn't acted, we might as well have taken the civilized values of the world and put them in the dustbin.
How has this experience changed you as an individual? I mean, it must have been the most exhausting time. It must have sending troops into war, into danger.
Well, I don't think you should go into something like this unless you really, really, really believe in it. I mean, it's not like an ordinary political decision. People die as a result of what's happened. And I feel myself, not just for the Kosovar Albanians that have died, there are people in Serbia that have died as a result of our air campaign, and you don't take a decision like that lightly, and innocent people die as well as guilty ones. That's war. There's no nice way of fighting war. There's no pleasant way of conducting a conflict such as this. So of course unless you're insensitive to humanity, you care about it and think about it pretty deeply before you do it.
NATO wanted the Serbs' surrender to be public. Over 30 TV crews assembled for the 9 a.m. meeting. Europa 93, a simple border cafe, had never seen anything like this. The frontiers close, clearly visible. NATO faxed Serbs the details of the non-negotiable withdrawal at 3 a.m. 11:38, General Sir Mike Jackson, NATO Ground Forces commander, arrived. 20 minutes later, the Serbs were here, 2 generals leading their delegation. Their bosses, indicted for war crimes in Kosovo, would risk arrest if they came here too. 3 hours and 5 minutes late, they began talking.
I can confirm to you that at 12:05 today, the talks commenced with General Jackson representing the alliance and General Stefanovic, the Assistant Interior Minister for Yugoslavia, and General Kovacevic, for the Yugoslav General Staff representing Yugoslavia.
Trays of pastries arrived for those inside, the lunch break scheduled for just half an hour, and for the media too, underlining how much NATO wants this covered. During the lunch, General Jackson made a series of satellite phone calls from the garden, as did General Fogelsong of the US Air Force, as word came that we were in for a long, hot afternoon waiting in the heat of the Macedonian summer.
So dictating and explaining the terms upon which 40,000 regular and irregular Serb troops must leave Kosovo is necessarily a detailed and painstaking process. The document, which the Serb side must sign at the end of this meeting, is described as substantial. The atmosphere in there is said to be very professional.
We watched NATO. NATO watched the Serbs holding high ground across the valley, and the Serbs watched us and NATO. Mid-afternoon and the Yugoslav delegation took a break, grim-faced, studying documents. But smiles all round among NATO soldiers at the same spot moments later. These days, the military camp where thousands of refugees once crammed the valley floor here, things have come full circle as NATO chooses this spot to dictate the expulsion of Serb forces for the return of those refugees. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Blace.
NATO bombs are still falling on Kosovo, hitting targets just across the border from Albania. 2 American B-52 bombers circle overhead, searching for Serbian troops. They throw off metal fragments to deflect missiles, and then they strike. This an area where Serbian troops have been defending Kosovo from rebel attack. Minutes earlier, dozens of men had been thrown out of Kosovo by the Serbs, jailed last week, then beaten, and beaten again today. But they arrived to an incredible sight. Several thousand people are now fleeing northern Albania itself because the Serbs are attacking. Onto a string of villages stretching for 10 miles, the Serbs rained down dozens of shells.
The shelling of this town was no accident. It is 6 miles inside Albania and was hit by the Serbs for an hour. They are intensifying their attack, and it has created real panic here.
Some can't get out quickly enough. Others huddle in tiny garden shelters or large air raid bunkers. This in the middle of the day in searing heat. There is no ceasefire here. Serb shells driving refugees who have fled them once away again. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
Tonight, after 14 hours of fruitless talks in a canvas aircraft hangar, it is clear the Kosovo peace talks are on the verge of collapse. General Sir Mike Jackson, the head of NATO's ground forces, arrived this morning expecting to get Yugoslavia's signature on a detailed plan for the withdrawal of Serb forces. But the Serb delegation, though more senior and more numerous than yesterday, refused to sign the agreement. One NATO source said the Yugoslavs had not come in the spirit NATO had expected. Any initial optimism quickly evaporated with the hours of deadlock. Senior officers even brought detailed maps and charts for the delegations to pore over, but NATO began to suspect the Serbs were drowning them in discussion of detail. The Russian military attaché to Belgrade arrived in an 11th hour attempt to keep the talks alive, but they were adjourned first for dinner and then again.
The situation is at the moment that they're not signing, and there's been a slight difficulty in the talks which results in, as I say, them not signing. So I can't give you any more specific details.
But they're in crisis, aren't they, these talks?
No, they're not in crisis at all. We've given them a few more hours, and hopefully they will come back and sign.
But the atmosphere could not be more tense, the next few hours more critical, if Kosovo is not to be plunged back into an even bloodier and longer conflict. Kevin Dunn, ITN, Northern Macedonia.
ITN's Julian Mannion has been in Belgrade since the Kosovo crisis began and joins us now. Julian, indications are that President Milošević wants the talks to make progress. Can he make that happen?
Well, if you mean can he carry out what he promises to carry out, I believe the answer to that is yes. We have had today a rather intriguing report that shortly after Mr. Chenomard and Mr. Ahtisaari left Belgrade last Friday, President Milošević received a delegation from angry officers of the 3rd Army Corps, heavily involved in Kosovo's defence, who asked him to toughen his position. On the other hand, we do believe that the president himself is simply trying to improve Yugoslavia's position on one specific aspect, and that is the key phrase that the international force should be under UN auspices. And as we know, there may be a UN Security Council resolution as early as tonight.
I suppose, Julian, the last thing anybody wants there is a resumption of the bombing.
Well, that's quite true. People here are plainly a little nervous about the possibility that Belgrade might be hit again. I think it would be fair to say that they are depressed rather than fearful. But nonetheless, nobody here wants that to happen. They're all hoping that it's going to end and end soon.
Julian Mannion in Belgrade, thank you. Even as the talks went on, American B-52s launched new attacks on Serb artillery and mortar positions along the Kosovo-Albanian border. ITN's Bill Neely watched the attacks.
No peace over Kosovo today, as first one bomber, then another, then waves of them searched for targets and struck. American B-52 bombers pounded Mount Pastrick, one of the key battlegrounds of the war. Day 75, and the war goes on. The target of this attack isn't obvious, but these bombs have landed high enough for thousands of Serbian troops to see them. The message is clear. The war goes on. Sign up to the peace deal, or it will intensify. NATO dropped bombs for hours, then leaflets for the Serbs. While you are fighting for Milošević, it says, his riot police are fighting your families who want you out of Kosovo. Serbia's troops show no sign of pulling out. Shelling Kosovo's rebels today, raining mortar fire on a string of villages. Some villages are miles inside Albania. No rebels and no villagers here anymore. And still, the Serbs push civilians out of Kosovo. Once again today, no families, only men, jailed and beaten by the police. I need water, he howls. Like the other men, he was interrogated for weeks by the police, then made to sign a piece of paper admitting he was a terrorist. The cruelty and the bombing from all sides shows no sign of ending. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
It is Britain's most elite battle group, and these troops had hoped to be crossing the border into Kosovo tonight. Instead, this evening, still they train, still they prepare for a mission now delayed. When it happens, these Challenger battle tanks of the 4th Armoured Brigade are expected to lead NATO's rapid entry into Kosovo. Securing their route to the capital Pristina will be the infantrymen of the Irish Guards. These are men at the peak of their training, but the only thing British troops are fighting tonight is their frustration.
We get told we're going in and then it's all, no, stop, wait out. We've just got to wait. And then it's, it just carries on like that. Hopefully one day we might actually get in there.
The same as other viewers watching the news at home, they can see the terrible events that have unfolded in Kosovo, and they are here to help and want to help. And quite a lot of them want to get stuck in.
Senior officers told us today their troops are preparing for a hostile environment in Kosovo. The main threat, they say, are renegade Serb militias, who it's feared may not withdraw with regular Yugoslav troops. They will, of course, also have to deal with blown-up bridges, minefields, unexploded bombs, and the thousands of craters caused by NATO's own bombardment. The engineers will play a crucial role in Kosovo. Despite the faltering talks, these troops remain on 4 hours' notice to go into action. But it may be days, even weeks, before they enter Kosovo. That's if there's a peace to keep. If there's not, then NATO insists these troops are training for a war they're still prepared to fight. But tonight all they can do is sit and wait for a change of heart from the man who calls the tune in Belgrade. Mark Austin, ITN, with British forces in Macedonia.
Julian, what's Belgrade's version of the talks breakdown?
Well, what Belgrade is insisting is that it is NATO rather than the Serbs who are attempting to twist the terms of the agreement that was reached last week. And what they point to are clauses 3 and 4 of this agreement, which specify that the International Security Force for Kosovo should come in under UN, United Nations auspices, and in clause 4 it says that it should have an essential NATO participation. And what that means, according to them, is first of all that there should be a UN Security Council resolution to mandate the presence of this force. And secondly, though it can have NATO troops within it, it should not be exclusively made up of NATO troops. And that is their reading of the document. And for the moment, that's what they're sticking to.
Well, then they're putting the blame on NATO. But from your own point of view, do you have a sense as to why the Serb army might be reluctant to sign up to this deal?
Well, we're talking here about both the politicians and the army. There was a political presence in these negotiations. But on the other hand, what we are learning is that after the agreement was reached, after President Milošević had given his assent, he received a delegation, apparently, from the Serbian 3rd Army Corps, which is heavily involved in the defense of Kosovo, which stated, this delegation, in no uncertain terms, that they were unhappy with the process that was taking place. And in particular, pressing, virtually demanding, that the NATO presence should be, in their words, genuine, and that there should be Russian troops involved, and various other things. And it appears that this delegation, so we're told from the 3rd Army, has had a significant effect in stiffening President Milošević's position on the whole matter. This is still at the level of unconfirmed reports, but it does appear that the army is deeply unhappy and wants to continue its presence in Kosovo for the time being until it gets what it wants.
Julian, thank you very much indeed.
After 2 days of talks, the 8 foreign ministers agreed a form of words which may put the Kosovan process back on track. The next stage is to get this turned into a UN resolution, and that's where there's still room for trouble. There's no mention of NATO in the draft text, as the Russians were quick to point out. NATO have been moved into the annexes, which includes the original G8 principles and last week's Ahtisaari-Chernomyrdin plan. The main text demands that Yugoslavia complete verifiable phased withdrawals from Kosovo according to a rapid timetable. But the wording is very vague, merely saying that the UN demands the full cooperation of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in their rapid implementation.
It is in the appendix to this resolution that this has a NATO core, and NATO will be the military leader.
The Russian Foreign Minister, Igor Ivanov, didn't see it that way. All aspects of the international presence will be discussed further, he said. We won't settle the exact form of Russian participation in advance. So, what happens next? Well, the draft UN resolution becomes part of a 3-stage process. First, the Security Council will discuss the text, but not adopt it. That should allow the military technical talks between NATO and the Yugoslav army to restart, followed by a verifiable Yugoslav withdrawal. Once NATO are satisfied this is taking place, they'll suspend the bombing. The UN resolution will be adopted and an international force will enter Kosovo. Or at least that's the theory.
We have broken through the obstacles in the peace process because we now have the text of a Security Council which enables us to get on with implementing on the ground the Ahtisaari package.
And in New York, the Security Council has already met to discuss the resolution before promptly adjourning. Tony Blair says the G8 text is strong and clear and meets all of NATO's requirements. But it could also serve another purpose, merely clarifying the confusion which continues to dog the Kosovan deal.
Good evening. A peace deal over Kosovo is imminent tonight, and it may just be hours away. NATO and Yugoslav generals met up again this evening in the same tent where the talks foundered at the weekend. This time there's more confidence, but no deal yet. In what was widely welcomed as a crucial breakthrough earlier today, the Western powers and Russia agreed the wording of a draft resolution, which is being put to the United Nations. Kevin Dunn has the latest from Macedonia.
A flurry of intense military activity at the Kumanovo airbase just inside Macedonia signalled the meeting of NATO and Yugoslav generals was imminent. The Serb generals, who less than 48 hours ago left here in defiance, slipped quietly into the base, almost unnoticed. Then General Sir Mike Jackson, NATO's ground commander, arrived carrying the agreement on a Serb withdrawal from Kosovo he now expected the Yugoslavs to sign. 20 minutes later, the full Yugoslav delegation of generals, Interior Ministry and Foreign Ministry officials drove in convoy to the giant canvas aircraft hangar specially built for these meetings. The sticking points had been over Yugoslavia's insistence on keeping several thousand troops in Kosovo. They had also resisted NATO's rapid timetable for a withdrawal. The question was, had they now accepted NATO's conditions in full? If so, NATO forces could begin moving into Kosovo within 24 hours. That would not be the end of the Kosovo conflict, but the beginning of the end. Kevin Dunn, ITN, Kumanovo, Macedonia.
Kevin, what's happening there now?
What's happening, Dermot, is that the two sides are now meeting in the giant camouflaged canvas aircraft hangar, a kind of a big tent really, which you can see behind me. The two sides led by General Sir Mike Jackson on the NATO side and by Yugoslavia's Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army. And the two sides are meeting to discuss the so-called technical military agreement, which will cover the when, where and how exactly of how the Serbs withdraw from Kosovo. And we're told that it hasn't happened yet, but we can expect that agreement to be signed tonight.
And Kevin, is there any suggestion that it could develop into another major hold-up?
A hold-up? No, I don't think so, but we could be in for a long night. It is a detailed document. It runs to 6 pages and many clauses, and the NATO and Serb delegations both want to go through it clause by clause to put the flesh on the bones of that agreement. But an agreement we do expect.
Kevin Dunn, thanks a lot.
The frustration of NATO soldiers being forced into political negotiations is being hidden no longer tonight. NATO spin officers briefed to say that talks ended because of political, not military problems.
The talks today have been, on the military level, generally constructive, but as you will appreciate, some political issues have begun to impinge. There have also been some difficulties in the timings of the timetable, which involve such things as the G8 approved a UN Security Council resolution tabling.
Late in the afternoon, the Serb delegation left. We were told they wanted further negotiations with Belgrade. Then, an hour later, we were suddenly told they're coming back. We've no idea why.
As I understand it, they've received new political information from their higher headquarters and were directed to come back by their higher headquarters.
And we don't know why?
We don't know why.
General Sir Mike Jackson had arrived last night, letting it be known a signature on the withdrawal plan from Kosovo was imminent. In fact, they talked on and off all the way through the night and the day. 2 problems, both of them largely political. First, the G8 political resolution has undoubtedly complicated these supposedly military talks. As Colonel Clifford put it,
intense and constructive discussions on both sides, having of course had to take the military technical agreement document and relook at it in the light of the G8 approved UN Security Council draft resolution.
the second difficulty is the timing. The bombing must stop, the Serbs must leave Kosovo. There must be a UN Security Council resolution, but both sides disagree about in what order these should happen. NATO spokesman Major Shea insists this is one of the central obstacles.
Timing and sequence, okay? And in relation to the political implications behind the UNSCR possible UNSCR that's out there.
You mean stop the bombing and then withdraw, or withdraw and then stop the bombing? That's
Well,
the debate, right?
Timing and sequence.
Tonight, helicopters roar overhead, cars come and go, but there's no sense yet that these talks are about to break up or reach a breakthrough.
Peace deal is signed. NATO and Serbs agree Kosovo pull out. British forces to be amongst the first to cross the border. Good evening. Yugoslav generals finally put their signatures tonight to a Kosovo peace deal. They're to start a phased withdrawal of their forces tomorrow. As soon as that withdrawal is verified, NATO will suspend its bombing, which started 11 weeks ago tonight, and NATO ground forces will go in as peacekeepers. The signing of tonight's breakthrough agreement was at that airbase on the Macedonian border, and ITN's James Mates reports from there.
It is the vindication of the air campaign. Late this evening, NATO's commander here, General Sir Mike Jackson, emerged from a day and a half of talks with his Yugoslav counterparts. His announcement that after 2.5 months of war, peace is at hand.
I have some very good news. I can confirm that General Milošević and General Stefanović have signed the agreement on behalf of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and that I have signed on behalf of NATO.
Only when NATO's satisfied the Serbs are leaving will the bombing stop.
Verifiable compliance with this agreement will establish the conditions for the suspension of the air campaign. I have made it clear that if subsequently the withdrawal timetable is breached, the agreement requires the air operation to resume.
And with that stern warning to the Serbs, he left to oversee the deployment of tens of thousands of NATO troops into Kosovo, likely to start within the next 48 hours. The Serbs, forced by a relentless bombing campaign to hand over a part of their territory to foreign occupation, put on as brave a face as possible.
And we reached this agreement in a good faith. We demonstrated our cooperative attitude. The atmospheric here was one of tolerance and of mutual understanding.
But for all their brave words as they drive back to Belgrade tonight, the Serb delegation know their leader has fatally miscalculated. Slobodan Milošević gambled NATO wouldn't bomb. It did. He then gambled his army could withstand the bombardment. It couldn't. The result tonight has been nothing short of humiliating surrender. James Mates, ITN, Macedonia.
James, talk us through those tense final hours. How was the deal finally done?
Well, it was a truly tortuous set of negotiations. Went right through last night, all day today, constantly interrupted because the military negotiators here kept jumping in their cars to head back into Serbia to talk down a secure telephone line to their political masters in Belgrade. There was one final break this evening. We thought it was all over for the night, but they did come back, and it seems that at that stage Slobodan Milošević had given up the game and decided that it was time to order his men to put their names at the bottom of that document. The dispute seems to have been really about the order in which the various events were going to take place. The suspension of the bombing, the Serb withdrawal, the passing of a UN resolution. NATO pretty much hung out for doing it its way, and it seems tonight that it's pretty much got its way here.
So James, what exactly is the process from here? What happens next?
Well, we haven't got a precise timetable yet from NATO about how its deployment is going to take place. The Serb delegation says that their withdrawals will start tomorrow. They will withdraw first from the southern parts of Kosovo, allowing the NATO forces to effectively follow them in, so probably within 48 hours or so. The great key there being to avoid any sort of vacuum when there's no one in control. The Pentagon confirmed tonight the Serbs have been given 11 days to complete their withdrawal, and they too have repeated the warning that General Jackson gave, that if they don't stick to that timetable, then aircraft are still around and the bombing can and will start again.
James Mates in Macedonia, thanks a lot. Here, the Defence Secretary George Robertson told MPs a short time ago that the agreement was a major political and military vindication of NATO's policy and resolve. He said that British forces would be amongst the first to cross the border into Kosovo. Here's Robert Moore.
Tonight, the scenes at NATO headquarters were of monumental relief. The Secretary-General Javier Solana smiling broadly. The alliance's first war now seemingly in its final hours. After exactly 11 weeks of bombing, the NATO ambassadors had their military agreement. It should trigger a rapid sequence of events, a Serb withdrawal and the entry into Kosovo, perhaps within 24 hours, of NATO-led peacekeeping forces. Tonight, on both sides of the Atlantic, there has been a similar reaction. Deep satisfaction, but still some anxiety, as the Serb implementation is awaited.
Already we are moving our forces to be prepared to go in very quickly so that there will not be any kind of a significant gap between Serb forces leaving and the KFOR going in.
Those British troops still training today in Macedonia will spearhead the entry into Kosovo. They will face a hostile environment with many mines and booby traps. But if all goes according to plan, they will not now have to fight their way in. Instead, they will fill the vacuum left by the Serbs and prepare the shattered province for the return of the refugees. Robert Moore, ITN.
Robert, tell us more about the timetable and makeup of the Kosovo Force.
Well, the first key part of the jigsaw is in place in terms of the military agreement. Really, within hours, we're now expecting the beginning of the Serb withdrawal. Perhaps at dawn, NATO will be able to verify it and then call a halt to the bombing. Almost simultaneous with that will come a UN resolution providing the peacekeeping force with its mandate. Then we expect the international peacekeeping force to enter Kosovo. And it's being stressed that it'll all happen very quickly. NATO is absolutely determined that no security vacuum is allowed to develop inside Kosovo.
And Robert, how difficult would you say the task is that is facing KFOR?
Well, I think it'll be an immensely chaotic environment they enter, not just in terms of mines and booby traps. There are, of course, hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people there. There is the risk of rogue paramilitary forces roaming the countryside. And also, NATO sources say they are anticipating a fresh refugee flow as the minority Serb population flee towards Kosovo. Indeed, tonight, in the last few minutes, we're getting reports that some Serb soldiers are rampaging through Albanian parts of Pristina, causing considerable levels of violence there. Those are unconfirmed reports, but clearly a sign of how difficult and volatile an environment Kosovo will be for the NATO forces.
Robert, thanks a lot.
Good morning. Hello. Did you hear that the agreement was signed between NATO and the Yugoslav army that they were going to leave Kosovo? Good news, isn't it? Good news. For once, a ray of optimism for the refugees of Kukës to wake up to. Since the end of March, thousands upon thousands of those expelled from Kosovo have staked out what sad little space they could find in the town and waited. It's probably fair to say they had more blind faith in NATO's ability to force the Serbs into submission than many experts and commentators did in the West. No one disputes that it's welcome news, but there are still doubts about President Milošević's good faith. So when did you first hear the news about the signing of the agreement?
Last night. I heard last night, but you know, we are all, how to say...
Concerned?
No, yes, concerned and skeptic.
Before this signature that he made in this letter, also he made more signatures.
This is Milošević?
Yes, Milošević, but they fell down. You see nothing from those signatures.
The faint sound of gunfire could be heard at the border post with Kosovo, though we were filming there just as NATO halted its bombing campaign. It's mainly through this crossing that the 450,000 refugees currently in Albania will somehow try to get home. By then, German NATO troops will be controlling the Kosovo side. In the refugee camps, they know it'll take a while for that return to get underway, and so summer school began today under canvas. The children of Kosovo have not had much teaching for over a year since the crisis began. Instead of education, they've been subjected to trauma and violence.
There will be big problems. The villages have been totally destroyed. The towns may not have been so badly damaged, but the children will have nowhere to return to. So they'll have to be taught in the towns when they first go back.
After all the refugees have suffered and with the hardships they're still facing, one of the questions is whether they can live alongside any Serbs remaining back home. Do you think they will still be living in Kosovo?
If they want, they will come back. For us, no problem. If they have homes in Kosovo, it's no problem. They are their homes. They can live there.
Can you imagine what it'll be like with the Serb army gone?
It's going to be like heaven. It's going to be like heaven because they did everything to us. It was like nightmare living with them.
However soon NATO begins to move into Kosovo, the 10 cities of Kukës are likely to be here for some time to come. But today, for once, their occupants saw no bomber trails in the sky and could allow themselves to believe the war was over.
Prime Minister, it was an extraordinary environment in which to conduct a military campaign. You, Gerhard Schroeder, Bill Clinton, Javier Solana, all of the anti-war generation, all with an anti-war past, having to fight a war in the face of military experts, desktop characters who said you were mad, that the air war would never work.
Well, we believed in the cause for which we were fighting. And obviously we took advice from our military people as well, and that they advised that it could be done, and I was quite certain that it had to be done. Because whatever the position you take on whether it's right to use force or not, surely the one set of circumstances in which it must be justified is to prevent racial genocide. And therefore, for me, it was a decision which was very straightforward, difficult to implement, but straightforward in terms of the choice it represented, and I think the others felt the same way.
But there was one area of real concern and criticism at times, and that was that whilst you were saying it was a just war and a moral war, it was okay to risk the lives of civilians on the ground, but not good enough to risk our own lives.
We were risking our lives. It is true that we did not lose any servicemen or women, but I can tell you when they were going up there night after night, they certainly were risking their lives. And of course, if the conflict had intensified, then there would have been greater risk still.
But you don't have a misgiving that if you had actually adjusted the rules of engagement to at least to allow aircraft to go lower and possibly pinpoint the positions of those that were driving these refugees out, you might have saved more from fleeing and saved more perhaps from being killed?
No, I think probably even in military terms that isn't right. And in any event, frankly, for the first period of time, we would have been using air power alone. And I should also say that when our forces now go into Kosovo, they'll be running considerable risks there. There are risks of landmines, there are risks of retreating Serbs, maybe pockets of resistance. We simply don't know what types of things they may face in there, but it is not a safe environment, and it's as well that we have a properly armed force that's going in.
We have a number of hugely expensive obligations that flow from all this. The prospect of keeping Romania and Bulgaria going. Their economies have been savaged by this. The billions of pounds that we're going to have to pour into Kosovo and eventually Serbia. Are we going to stick to the kind of civilian commitment which is now enshrined in what has to be regarded as a military victory?
Yes, we are committed to that, and we should learn from the history here.
It'll come from our pockets?
Well, it'll have to come from everybody who's contributed to this so far, and we've got to carry on making sure that the money that otherwise we would have been spending on weapons, we're investing in the future. Because if we don't do that, then the risk is we end up having to intervene once more in a conflict. Remember Bosnia. We didn't act when maybe we should have. We've ended up with 3 million refugees from former Bosnia. There's 1 million of them living in the European Union. The costs were enormous, and 250,000 people died. So, there is no cost-free option, just as there was no easy choice in starting the conflict. And the other thing I'd say is that we worked so hard to avoid this conflict. I mean, I was amongst those at the very beginning who were saying, let's be careful, let's give the Rambouillet peace talks another few weeks, let's see if we can work the whole thing out. None of us who went into it without very careful thought and scrutiny of all the alternatives. But in the end, you either allowed it to happen or stopped it.
When you were elected leader of the Labour Party, you could never seriously have thought that you would have to take the lead role in a massive military operation against a country in Europe. Has it changed you?
I don't suppose I did think that, but then, you know, in politics that can happen. And if I was going to become Prime Minister and such a situation arose, you have to face it. I honestly don't know whether, I mean, people ask me, has it changed me? I don't know, but I do know that I feel at the end of it, not really a sense of, I mean, I don't feel a sense of triumph at all about it, or a sense of joy, because I know that many terrible things have happened in these past few weeks, and many innocent people have died. And I feel simply a burden of responsibility to make sure that we as it were, carry the peace through now and make that work for people in Kosovo, and also that we start to address some of the questions of international conflicts, how we resolve them, how we define a proper doctrine of international community that allows us to make the world a safer and more secure place.
Did you sleep at night?
I did, but probably less than...
How often were you woken up?
Several times.
You are tremendously empowered by this. It's inevitable. The Americans have looked to you as the leader of this endeavor. The world has looked to you as the leader of this endeavor. That's inescapable. You must recognize that yourself. There's a danger that could go to your head.
No, it won't do. And my experience of politics is that what goes up usually comes down. So I don't think... I mean, what I think is important for us as a government is to recognize this was an event we didn't expect. We have, I hope, done our best to resolve it, and I can tell you the support I had from Robin Cook, who was absolutely brilliant as Foreign Secretary throughout this, George Robertson as Defence Secretary, Claire Short in charge of international development, and without her, a lot of the proper work on the humanitarian side would not have happened. And our own armed forces, I mean, Sir Charles Guthrie, the Chief of Defence Staff, who was just brilliant throughout it. You know, first of all, I recognise we worked as a team throughout it, and secondly, look, we come back to the problems we've got to confront in the country and the better schools and hospitals and all the reasons why we were elected. So I don't think there's any danger of losing a sense of proper perspective.
Good evening. British and other NATO forces are tonight preparing to move into Kosovo after 11 weeks of war. Today, Yugoslav forces began moving out as promised, and NATO suspended its bombing. The peacekeeping forces, legitimised now by a United Nations resolution, had been expected to go over the border at dawn, though NATO is now saying it will be Saturday. The Prime Minister said today he felt no sense of triumph, but knew that NATO's cause had been just. Here's Robert Moore.
There were a few defiant gestures and salutes, and some shouts and laughter from the retreating soldiers. But there is no disguising just how humiliating is their withdrawal from the province they have ravaged. From early this afternoon, convoys of Yugoslav soldiers were on the move. And within 11 days, the pullout must be complete, and Belgrade's rule of Kosovo will be over. The withdrawal was sufficient for NATO's Secretary-General to make the dramatic statement that Serbia was complying with the West's 5 conditions.
And therefore, a few moments ago, I instructed General Clark to suspend NATO's air operations against Yugoslavia.
In Downing Street, the Prime Minister said the air war had been morally justified.
We end it with no sense of rejoicing. We cannot rest until the refugees are home. But then, truly, we will be able to say that good has triumphed over evil, justice has overcome barbarism, and the values of civilization have prevailed.
This evening, Western leaders are trying hard not to sound too triumphalist, stressing this was a war fought not for territory, but for humanitarian reasons. And the sense of victory is also tempered by the scale of the task that still lies ahead. And across the Atlantic, President Clinton said the outcome was a tribute to Western resolve.
The Kosovars have been victims of terrible atrocities. Their only hope was that the world would not turn away in the face of ethnic cleansing and killing, that the world would take a stand. We did for 78 days. Because we did, the Kosovars will go home.
This evening, the last piece of the diplomatic jigsaw is in place. The UN Security Council voted to authorize the NATO-led force to enter Kosovo. Only China abstained. No one voted against. With that mandate in place, NATO reinforcements are deploying in the southern Balkans, getting ready for a peacekeeping mission of immense complexity. But whatever the perils of their entry into Kosovo, it seems they will not have to fight their way in through organised Serb resistance. Robert Moore, ITN.
It'll be British paratroopers and Gurkhas who spearhead the move into Kosovo. Even if unopposed, they'll face all the dangers of minefields and unexploded bombs. Our senior correspondent Mark Austin has been with them today.
This evening, the elite infantry of the British Army is on the move. For NATO's forces here, the waiting is finally over. Throughout the day, a fleet of Chinook and Puma helicopters ferried hundreds of paratroopers to forward assembly areas, where they are now poised to move as soon as the order comes. These are the soldiers who will almost certainly be the first across the border, airlifted to secure the strategic high ground overlooking the main road to Kosovo's capital, Pristina, where they hope the British headquarters in Kosovo can be established within days.
These troops are just being moved within Macedonia, but in effect, the airlift to Kosovo has begun.
And for these men, the orders to enter the province should now come in the next 36 hours.
I don't think any of the lads here are that worried about the potential for anything to go wrong, because we're trained and we know what we've got to do. We're just going to get on with it.
And they are preparing for anything. The heavy armour is also on the move tonight.
British forces will act decisively and robustly in an impartial way to be quite clear as to what they have to do. They're fully trained, equipped and manned to get on with it. I know their morale is very high.
We filmed one Chinook today throwing out decoy flares, practicing its defence against ground attack. We remain vulnerable, said the pilot. It only takes one angry Serb with a shoulder-launched missile. This evening, NATO and Yugoslav military officials met to work out the details of the Serb withdrawal and NATO's entry. They reached agreement, and it seemed NATO's forces may move in at dawn tomorrow. But later came a hitch. The Germans apparently insisting their forces take a more leading role. The first troops are now likely to cross the border early on Saturday morning. Mark Austin, ITN, Macedonia.
And Mark Austin will be among the first correspondents into Kosovo with the troops.
As we drove into Kosovo, we passed the Yugoslav army heading out, taking with them their anti-aircraft guns. These weapons prevented NATO from carrying out low-level attacks in Kosovo. But whatever the soldiers believe, they didn't bring victory to the Serbs. They're taking surface-to-air missiles as well, just as the agreement signed at Kumanovo demands. Judging by the numbers we've seen, there are many thousands of troops yet to leave Kosovo. It's not clear where they'll all go, because most of their barracks in Serbia have been razed by NATO bombs. Their commanders have told them they were not defeated, and in one sense it's true. NATO never managed to hit large numbers of vehicles and soldiers on the ground. But in another, they've lost completely. They were fighting to retain Kosovo, and by tomorrow it will be effectively under foreign control. The Kosovo Liberation Army says that some Serb forces are burning villages as a last act of revenge. These pictures taken near Unich, they say, are the proof. We saw Serb civilians on the move too. It may look like the scenes of Albanians fleeing Kosovo 2 months ago, but many Albanians say this exodus is different. They accuse their Serb neighbours of joining the paramilitaries to loot their houses and drive them out. Some Serbs may be fleeing justice or vengeance and have no faith in NATO's promises that Serbs will be safe in Kosovo now. Others feel President Milošević has surrendered sacred Serb land.
We have given up on Kosovo. We have lost everything, and this is a capitulation.
This is a lost cause. We could have done this straight away, and now none of this would have happened.
Tomorrow, NATO troops are expected to be here in Pristina. It's not a ghost town, but the population is a fraction of what it used to be, and no one here knows quite what to expect. It's calm in Pristina at the moment, but since we've been here, we've heard several bursts of gunfire. It could be civilians, it might be soldiers. They might be firing into the air to celebrate the end of the war. They could be shooting in anger. What's clear is that as NATO makes its final preparations to come here, Kosovo is still a very dangerous and unstable place. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Pristina.
Good evening. The carefully orchestrated plans for the peacekeeping force in Kosovo were thrown into chaos today by a dash for the border by Russian troops from Bosnia. With NATO's move into the province put back until tomorrow morning, it looked as if the Russians would be there first. British paratroopers and Gurkhas were put on immediate alert to head them off. They were stood down again after an undertaking not to jump the gun was extracted from the Russians. Mark Austin is with the British troops.
This evening, British forces are just hours away from entering Kosovo. Troops are finally poised to cross the border after a day of extraordinary drama and confusion. This afternoon, sudden and frenetic activity as Chinook helicopters arrived to pick up hundreds of British paratroopers to race into Kosovo. It was on the orders of NATO commanders, alarmed by the news that the Russians were already heading towards Pristina. For a few hours it seemed as if a potentially calamitous confrontation with Russian forces was about to take place. But just as the paratroopers were about to leave, they were held back. This is fast becoming a military operation bogged down with politics and confusion.
This evening, after a day of expectation for these troops, they are back to square one. It now seems likely that the entry into Kosovo will take place as planned at dawn tomorrow morning.
Also on the move to the border this afternoon, Britain's 4th Armoured Brigade, including the firepower of the Challenger tank. They too were suddenly told to stop. Their mission is to get to Pristina as quickly as possible to secure the capital. They hope to have the British headquarters set up there by tomorrow evening. The NATO soldiers who have reached the border this evening have been mobbed by Kosovo Albanian refugees, celebrating the imminent liberation of their homeland. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
Tonight, that Russian convoy was reported to still be on the move through Serbia towards the Kosovo border. But what if it were to cross before we move in from the other direction? Our diplomatic editor, Robert Moore, explains why NATO was prepared to risk a confrontation today.
It was the least expected twist to the end of the war and caught NATO's commanders completely by surprise. A Russian column of troops and armoured vehicles careering through Yugoslavia and heading for Kosovo. They had simply left their peacekeeping duties in Bosnia and with some audacity painted KFOR, as the Kosovo Force is known, on their vehicles.
I'll go work it out.
It caused an immediate stir for America's national security team, fearing a clash between Russian and NATO forces. The White House won assurances the Russian convoy would not actually cross into Kosovo.
They haven't entered Kosovo, and they've given us assurances that they're not going to enter Kosovo, at least not until arrangements have been worked out for their participation under agreed terms within a unified command.
The NATO forces, spearheaded by British troops, are moving into Kosovo from Blace in Macedonia. Their main objective will be to secure the road into Pristina. Then NATO will divide Kosovo into zones of control. The British zone, the largest, will be central Kosovo. The sensitive northern area will be occupied by the Italians. But now it's been complicated by that move by Russian troops out of Bosnia, first towards Belgrade and then on to Kosovo, and all of it at the most sensitive time of all. For the NATO commander, General Mike Jackson, Russia's erratic move jeopardized the intricate sequence of diplomatic and military events and his chain of command. It has left confusion tonight, not just on the ground, but in capitals around the world. Robert Moore, ITN.
The roads north out of Kosovo were busy today with withdrawing Yugoslav troops. Also fleeing were Serb civilians, now refugees in their turn. Our correspondent Julian Mannion travelled from Belgrade into Kosovo and down as far as Pristina.
At the border between Kosovo and Serbia proper, we found the Yugoslav army in full retreat, firing in the air to celebrate their exit from what has been the principal war zone. On display were the dated anti-aircraft weapons which proved so ineffective against high-flying NATO aircraft.
The withdrawal is taking place, and apparently in the order that NATO has decreed. Anti-aircraft units are going out first. They're heading out down there towards Serbia proper, where they will stay on the other side of a buffer zone in a position which will not allow them to interfere with the future of Kosovo.
It seems that at this stage President Milošević is fulfilling NATO's terms, pulling out the army which he had promised would defend the sacred soil of Kosovo. As the soldiers leave, some of the Serb population is going with them. Others remain in Pristina,
Already emptied of most of its Albanian inhabitants, it is now a city where Serb civilians are increasingly fearful about what may happen in the coming days. And from villages nearby, there are columns of smoke. The result, it is said, of Serbs burning their own homes before departing. Meanwhile, the withdrawal of a humbled Serb army goes on. Julian Mannion, ITN, Pristina.
And within the past few minutes, we've been getting reports that an Allied military aircraft has crashed tonight at the airport at Krušev in Albania. There was an explosion and fire, and the area has been sealed off. The Ministry of Defence here in London said they couldn't confirm the reports, but were checking.
The news from Kosovo has the refugees worried. The Serbs are withdrawing, says the report, but shooting as they go. And Russian soldiers are massing to move in. The Russians, he says, no way, we don't want them. The Russians are like Serbs, he says, we won't go back to our homes where they are.
We hate these troops, but...
Russian troops?
Yes, Russian troops.
Because they are like Serbian people. They don't love too much Albanian.
Inside Kosovo, other sites the refugees fear. Houses burning today, Serb soldiers nearby. This along the route the refugees will take to go home. They're getting ready to go, fixing their cars and washing off the dirt of a 2-month exile. Some even left the camps today to go closer to the border. Do you feel happy today?
I'm happy because I'm alive.
They escaped with little else but their lives, and most won't move until NATO takes Kosovo. The refugees in these camps are too afraid to go back into Kosovo. They won't budge for 2 or 3 weeks. But very soon, a tide of 500,000 people forced from their homes will flood back into Kosovo. And NATO says it will do nothing to slow them or stop them. It will protect them, though, and help feed them. More food arriving today. Hunger inside Kosovo, a real worry. Aid agencies will go in on the heels of NATO. Their priorities clear.
Water, food, shelter is going to be vital. But also you've got to be in a position to offer hope.
It's been in short supply, but hope is what they have now.
Good evening. The NATO Commander General Mike Jackson finally flew into the Kosovan capital, Pristina, tonight, at the end of an extraordinary day of troop movements across the province. Operation Joint Guardian began at dawn, the biggest of its kind in Europe since the Second World War. British troops led the mission. The Gurkhas were first across the border, and they were followed by British paratroopers marching into Pristina airport. It was there that they came face to face with a contingent of Russian soldiers. The Russians had caught NATO off guard last night when they unexpectedly streamed into the city before any NATO troops arrived. ITN's James Mates is in Kosovo.
The orders were, we go in at dawn. The Paras and Gurkhas of the 5th Armoured Brigade were ready. It was the roar of the first helicopters overhead that told them the signal had come. The British were going in. Chinooks swinging Land Rovers and bundles of ammunition from their bellies. Puma helicopters carrying the elite troops who were to secure the first bridgeheads. All were aware there were dangers below, some firing decoy flares as a precaution. And with them, riding shotgun, American Apache helicopters, now entering potentially hostile territory for the first time in this war. As the helicopters passed over, the troops began their move. A gentlemanly invasion, this, watched politely by bemused frontier police. These troops were moving 24 hours later than planned. The Russians had robbed them of the honor of being the first foreign troops in, but NATO's peaceful occupation of the province had begun. Walking alongside the vehicles, Gurkhas and sappers were detailed to search for mines or booby traps. The capital, Pristina, lay just 40 miles away, but every mile, every culvert, every bridge had to be secured for the heavy armor to roll through. And when it came, it became clear this was to be a force so powerful that once in place, no one is going to challenge NATO's grip on this province. Challenger tanks, Warriors, Scimitar armoured cars, an array of British firepower not mobilised in Europe since World War II. Away from the roar of tank engines, the land they crossed was eerily quiet. Mile upon mile of southernmost Kosovo emptied of its people, the livestock slaughtered, crops unplanted, and in village after village, houses looted and then gutted by fire. As laid out in NATO's plans, by day's end the tanks were approaching the outskirts of the capital, Pristina. As dusk fell and amid a torrential thunderstorm, NATO's cavalry in the form of the Challenger tanks of the King's Royal Hussars was heading into the city. This is where NATO and its commander, General Sir Mike Jackson, will establish its headquarters. The symbolism is unmistakable. The NATO powers now run Kosovo. James Mates, ITN, with the British Army in Pristina.
And in the last few minutes, we've received the first pictures of General Jackson's arrival in the Kosovan capital. He flew by army helicopter from the British base in northern Macedonia and touched down in Pristina a short time ago. Then, in heavy rain, he made a brief statement.
We will be robust and we will be even-handed. Violence or non-compliance will not be tolerated from whichever quarter it may come. The military technical agreement, which I signed only a few nights ago, regulates KFOR's relations with the Yugoslav forces. I shall shortly be telling the KLA how I expect them to carry out the actions required of them by the United Nations Security Council resolution.
ITN's Mark Austin was with the first British troops to cross the border into Kosovo. He left Blace in Macedonia with the Gurkhas at dawn and was airlifted into Kosovo. After landing near Kačenik, he joined troops making their way through the Kačenik Gorge. He then travelled north with the first of the reconnaissance paratroopers and up to Pristina. He sent us this report.
This evening in Kosovo, those who have known only suffering these past few months suddenly had something to celebrate. The few Kosovo Albanians left in this ravaged province came out to welcome British troops as liberating heroes. From their burnt-out homes, they waved. The Albanians are only now beginning to see an end to their agony, and British soldiers were overwhelmed by the reception.
It's one of the proudest days of my life, makes it all worthwhile. Waiting there for 2.5 months, then you come in, didn't know what to expect, flowers come at us instead of stones.
D-Day had barely dawned here when at 4:30 this morning the airlift began from a cornfield just inside Macedonia. From there, hundreds of paratroopers and Gurkhas were ferried across the border in Chinook and Puma helicopters, the first NATO troops into Kosovo. We went in with the Gurkhas. A short flight, just a few minutes, but in many ways a flight into the unknown. It was a tense operation, our Puma landing on the main road to Pristina, and the Gurkhas immediately took up positions at the roadside. Almost before they could move, other helicopters came in.
Well, it's now just after 5:30 in the morning, and the first wave of the Gurkhas have arrived. And what their job now is to do is to secure this road for the armoured brigade about to move up here.
We came across boxes of explosives at the entrance to one tunnel. It held up NATO's armoured columns for almost 2 hours before it was dealt with. Moments later, gun and mortar fire sounded in the surrounding hills, and snipers were called up, though not used. And then we witnessed an extraordinary confrontation between the Gurkhas and a convoy of Serb policemen in civilian cars. They were stopped and told to hand over their weapons. The police chief refused.
He's got 2 minutes to hand over his weapons, and then we will use force to take the weapons.
Imate 2 minuta da podložite oružje, suprotno mi ćemo da vam oduzmemo.
Okay, no problem.
With the guns of the Gurkhas pointing at him, he decided to change his mind. The British officer was enforcing the robust rules of engagement handed down by NATO commanders. The Serb policemen were all forced to hand over their weapons. AK-47s were lining the road.
They are the weapons with which the Yugoslav police have terrorised the Kosovo Albanians here. Handing them over is a symbol of their humiliation.
Along the road, we met the commander of the 5th Airborne Brigade, who said he expected such difficulties.
I mean, I'm not fazed by this at all. I mean, this is bound to happen.
This afternoon, the Gurkhas were fating the arrival of the armoured brigade, and what remains of the Serb army here could only watch as Kosovo came under NATO control. Mark Austin, ITN, Pristina, Kosovo.
ITN's Julian Mannion was at Pristina airport today, where he watched a tense standoff between arriving British forces and the Russians. The Russians, as we've said, had gone into Pristina overnight and they'd moved quickly to take control of the city airport. This is Julian Mannion's report.
At mid-morning, the most advanced unit of the British Army was at a crossroads 25 kilometres inside Kosovo. They were men of the Royal Gurkha Rifles who set up a checkpoint and searched cars for weapons while US helicopter gunships prowled overhead. And it was here that a difficult and potentially dangerous confrontation began with the Yugoslav army. The Yugoslavs brought up a convoy of heavy lorries and insisted that they had the right to go and pick up equipment and ammunition now stranded behind the British lines. A Yugoslav officer muttered about potential conflict, and his men brought up an antiquated armoured car which pointed its gun at the British soldiers.
At the moment, basically, we've been asked to stop any VJ forces moving south down the road, and the VJ behind me want to go further south, and basically I'm just waiting for some clear confirmation about whether we can allow them to go or not.
And a few minutes ago they moved up an armoured vehicle and they're pointing a machine gun at you.
We have armoured vehicles by the dozen as well, so it's just another vehicle.
Soon afterwards, the main British spearhead force arrived, scimitar armoured cars and trucks full of paratroopers. The Yugoslav officers stood in their way and told the British commander, Brigadier Adrian Freer, that he was trying to go faster than the signed agreement allowed. For the Yugoslav army commanders negotiating with the British officers behind me over there, today has been a serious humiliation. Until this morning, they were still in control of Kosovo province. Now they've had to come here with maps and apparently a copy of the agreement to try to argue that today the British army has gone a little bit too far. A solution was quickly found. The Yugoslavs were permitted to go and pick up their equipment, and the British army moved forward across country towards the airport. On the way, more encounters with sullen Yugoslav troops still encamped in burnt-out Albanian villages, where every obstacle on the road had to be checked for booby traps. It was a foretaste of what will clearly be a difficult peacekeeping operation. Julian Mannion, ITN, Pristina.
And a few minutes ago, I spoke to Julian Mannion in central Pristina. Julian's, are the Russians still very much in evidence in the city?
Well, we understand that the Russians are still camped at the airport. They're no longer in the city since their tumultuous arrival here in the middle of last night. They went to the airport, they camped there, and apparently they're still there. We're with the British now because the British column, this spearhead column, which I accompanied on a winding journey through the burnt-out villages of the Albanian countryside to get to the southern side of the airport perimeter, they found them there, and Brigadier Freer, the commander of this group, went in to negotiate with the Russians, and it seems that they haven't come to any firm conclusions, because a little bit later, when General Jackson came there to give a press conference, it appears that the press conference was disturbed by the Russian soldiers revving up the engines of their APCs. Very large machines, these, capable of generating a lot of noise. It doesn't seem to be a particularly amicable act, or one that indicates there's going to be a quick, smooth solution to the Russian presence.
And Julian, what's the mood among the Serbian population there tonight?
Sullen, I think, grim are the two best words to describe it. We saw that all day today. They didn't like, for example, having their cars searched by the Gurkha soldiers at the roadblocks. A few of the children waved at the passing soldiers, but tonight again we've had disturbing reports of Serbs attacking Albanians in an Albanian district of the city where some Albanians still live. Overall, the Serbs are grim.
Julian Mannion, thank you. As word of the NATO push into Kosovo spread, so did the celebrations among the thousands of ethnic Albanian refugees in camps along the borders. They had earlier been sent a message from President Clinton. He told them, "You will be going home." Bill Neely sent this report from Kukes in Albania.
In row upon row of tents and beyond, 400,000 refugees are ready. The engines tested, they're ready to load up the little they have and reclaim their homeland. There were smiles today now that NATO is in Kosovo, but fear as well, because the Russians are there too. The Russians are just like Milošević, he says. We've never liked them. We're nervous now because we're not safe to go back to our homes with Russians there. But another force came today to make them safe, the German army. 1,500 men and all the hardware of war. the advance guard for thousands more. This German army will occupy southern Kosovo, as a very different German army did half a century ago. This time, though, they will be welcomed by the local people into an area which has seen some of the bitterest fighting of this war. And these refugees, above all, will be glad to leave the camps. Last night, they escaped death by a fraction. This British Hercules transport plane crashed just a few hundred yards from their camp, exploding after a failed takeoff. No one in the camps or on the plane was killed. The explosion sent this refugee into labour. This morning, her baby was born. It's now called freedom. Victory is what they're now proclaiming as they gear up to follow NATO home. Bill Neely, ITN, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
All afternoon, the centre of Kukës was lined with refugees and townspeople, cheering every NATO vehicle, savouring the day the alliance entered Kosovo. On the road leading to town, a long line of German KFOR armoured personnel carriers and jeeps was ending its long journey across the mountains from Macedonia. The Germans have been allocated the southwestern sector of Kosovo, based around the town of Prizren. The detachment of some 600 are spending the night just outside Kukës. If all goes according to plan, they'll cross the border tomorrow.
If we can support humanitarian relief operations, we do it with pleasure.
Overnight, near disaster for KFOR, a British Hercules cargo plane with ammunition on board crashed while taking off from a NATO airstrip. Of the 12 crew on board, mostly British, only one was seriously injured. The plane, parts of which hit a brick building, was just 300 yards from one of the refugee camps around Kukës. The town that symbolised suffering, despair and squalor is now, as you can see, quite transformed. Seeing NATO vehicles move amongst them, close enough to touch, is a proof the refugees have been waiting for, that they will finally go home. Gabirado, Channel 4 News, Kukës.
Good evening. The NATO peacekeeping mission in Kosovo was embroiled in violence several times today. In the capital, Pristina, a British paratrooper shot dead a man who's believed to have been a Serb police officer. A German journalist was killed in a separate shooting incident. In Prizren, in the south of the country, another Serb was killed by German troops. It came as British soldiers began their mission to take control of Pristina. Mark Austin spent the day with them.
Paratroopers patrolling the streets of Pristina tonight as British forces take control of a capital in chaos. It is a tense and dangerous time here, a day when for the first time British troops carried out the threat to enforce their authority. It happened when these paratroopers were fired upon by an off-duty policeman with a semi-automatic pistol. He was warned 6 times to put down the weapon, and then he was shot dead. It is an early reminder of how difficult this mission could be for British forces. 2 other Serb policemen were detained at gunpoint. The paratroop commander here told me his men would not hesitate to use force again.
They have a duty to save life, and if they're caught in that sort of circumstances, they will have no hesitation in using their own small arms to immediately bring that incident to a close.
There were several confrontations during the day. It is a city bristling with guns carried by Serb police, troops and paramilitaries still to withdraw. They are surly men who have carried out their savagery with impunity, until now. At the moment, these Yugoslav police are allowed to remain in Pristina, but they have to be out of this city within the next 2 days. Today we saw truckloads of Serb paramilitary thugs making their defiant exit through crowds of jeering Albanians. These are the very men accused of the ethnic cleansing that brought NATO into Kosovo. Their parting shot was to torch the biggest mosque complex in Pristina. And British troops today unearthed more evidence of Serb terror. In the rubble of a former military post, they came across hundreds of passports and ID documents belonging to ethnic Albanians forced from this province. But today, in the Albanian sector of Pristina, it was Liberation Day. They greeted the British forces as saviours. There were extraordinary scenes. And in these areas too, there was an ecstatic welcome for the patrolling paratroopers, flowers for the British Army's elite fighters, and tears too.
Very happy. Welcome, England Army.
Until today, many of these people were too scared even to walk on the streets of this capital. The problem for NATO's forces is to persuade the Serbs that they're here to protect them as well.
But this evening we witnessed Serb civilians streaming out of Kosovo in long convoys. This woman told me the Albanians had killed her son. It seems the revenge attacks have begun, and a new exodus of fear is underway. Mark Austin, ITN, Pristina, Kosovo.
NATO commanders have been forced to look for a new headquarters in Kosovo after a group of Russian troops continued their blockade of the airport in Pristina. Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton have agreed to intensive talks to settle Russia's peacekeeping role. Julian Mannion is at the airport.
This was supposed to be General Jackson's headquarters, but today Russian troops were still guarding Pristina airport and refusing to let the British Army in. A pair of NATO helicopters came and went, but the strategic airfield, an important part of NATO's plans, remained firmly in the hands of the Russian paratroopers who seized it in the early hours of Saturday morning. Near the airfield perimeter, I found a British patrol and asked them what was going on.
The airport?
Yes.
It's a mix, I believe it's a mixed Russian-British operation.
Yes, we've just been to the airport entrance and there are lots of Russians but no British. Where are the British?
Well, you need to see my boss behind me then. Right. So I'm under the impression they're there.
In fact, British armoured vehicles were refused entry this morning and British officers huddled for hasty consultations. The French had no better luck when they brought a convoy up to the roadblock, where once again the Russians showed no sign of giving way. A French officer explained a little plaintively that his mission was to set up a fuel storage area.
A fuel depot, and here the NATO told me here in this area.
But the answer was no, and the French convoy turned round. This evening, NATO appeared to give up its efforts to take immediate control of the airport. We found British troops withdrawing. Just one NATO unit remained close by, a Canadian intelligence section with ultra-modern surveillance equipment. It was apparently positioned so NATO can keep track of what the Russians are doing on the strategically vital airfield. So the Russians are still in control of the airport, and the British Army will have to put its headquarters somewhere else. This represents a serious disruption for General Jackson's plans. But even more seriously, it poses the question of just how coordinated this peacekeeping operation is going to be and what role the Russians, with their openly pro-Serb sympathies, are going to play in it. Julian Mannion, ITN, at Pristina Airport.
As we mentioned earlier, German troops have shot dead one Serb and seriously injured another in the Kosovan town of Prizren. There was further violence as Serb troops pulled out of the province. Our correspondent Bill Neely was there. Viewers may find some of the scenes in his report distressing.
The war is over, but there's no peace in Kosovo. A car is peppered with the bullets of NATO soldiers. From the car, NATO says 2 Serbs had opened fire on their troops. It's German soldiers doing the shooting just hours after arriving in Kosovo on their first military occupation since World War II. NATO says the 2 men inside, Serb civilians, had guns and a grenade. One is dead. The end of a day of confrontation and clashes. The troops gave the Serb victory salute, but they are retreating. On the road, they carried their flag with pride. But minutes later, in Kosovo's 3rd city, Prizren, it became a provocation. Thousands of Kosovar Albanians, who've endured a decade of Serb oppression, became enraged as the column passed, and they turned on the retreating troops. With each tractor load of weapons and ammunition, the Serbs were stoned and spat at. The violence grew. The crowd baying for blood. Killers, murderers, they screamed. Suddenly, panic as heavily armed Serb soldiers ran in to the rescue. There is now a tense and dramatic standoff here The Yugoslav soldiers have advanced into this town as a unit. The German troops are holding them back. They've fired some shots, and there's a crowd of several thousand people here ready to attack the Yugoslav soldiers. The crowd taunted the Serbs, and then the moment that power truly changed hands in Prizren, as the Serbian troops were forced away by NATO officers, a German commander pushing them out. Earlier, the Serbs abandoned the border with Albania, snipers coming off the hills. It's finished?
Finished. Oh. Thank God. Thank God.
Look,
yeah,
you got us on the one side.
One side.
And you got the rest of the world on the other side.
Their border post was smashed, their flag pulled down. The symbols of Serbian rule in Kosovo are being destroyed. Bill Neely, ITN, Prizren, Kosovo.
British soldiers in southern Kosovo have found 3 sites they believe contain the bodies of scores of massacred Albanians. Local people have placed flowers on the suspected graves in Kachnik. James Mates reports from the village.
Kachnik in southern Kosovo is free, for the first time in nearly 3 months, from occupation by Serb militias. Free, but now almost deserted. Its houses burned, its shops looted. But worse than that, far worse, in the graveyard lie rows of freshly dug graves. Eyewitnesses told us these graves were dug by the Serb police, who kept a macabre count of the bodies here. 81, though locals say they hold many more. Perhaps most sinister of all, next to one row they had begun excavating a second, of graves ready, apparently, for victims yet to come. There are already reports from the army and from local people of several mass graves in this area. Some, like this one, clearly marked, others where the Serbs have tried harder to cover up what they've done. It seems that as NATO control extends outwards from the main roads into rural areas like this one, there is still a lot to be discovered. Among those buried in Kachnik is the brother of Malehat Shehu. She showed us the names of 32 people killed in and around the courtyard where she's now standing on April the 9th by Serb paramilitaries.
Here comes Laon. It's my brother here, the son of my uncle. He comes shocked. My friends.
She kept a diary of the occupation. She read me her entry for the day her brother Rashek died.
Tilati Kemet Pavla.
A soldier told me, Melihate, your brother's been killed. He told me Serb police had taken the bodies so we couldn't bury them. At that moment, I started crying.
Killed with him were 3 young nurses. One had been holding this medical kit when she died. It still bears the marks of the bullet that killed her. Miradi Bruti and her husband Ali told me they were lined up to be shot that day. They survived because they recognized one of the executioners, a man who grew up in the town, who had eaten at their table.
He told us to go. As we walked away, we saw 2 bodies lying dead. They had killed them.
Since NATO arrived, survivors have come down from the hills to place flowers on these graves. War crimes investigators will be here soon. This town is most certain to be of interest to them. James Mates, ITN, Kachnik, southern Kosovo.
They endured 3 months of war. They inflicted a decade of oppression in southern Kosovo. Today, the Serbian army pulled out amid torrents of abuse.
Crowd killers!
Killers, murderers, they cried as they chased busloads of troops through the streets. Prizren today is a tinderbox. Power is changing hands here in a dangerous and dramatic fashion as southern Kosovo is emptied of its Serbian population. Nearby, 4,000 Serb civilians prepared to flee the city that was their home too. Do you know where you're going?
No.
What do you feel to have to flee your city like this?
I have words. I want to cry, but I can't. It's a tragedy.
And then neighbour turned on neighbour. The Serb victory salutes met with obscene gestures, spit and stones from the Kosovar Albanians. The crowd taunted them with the name of Kosovo's rebels. Many responded and were stoned. Some looked bewildered. A new generation learning the bitter rules of the Balkans. Gunfire today too from Kosovo's Albanians. These bullets to celebrate the Serbian army retreat. The wild celebrations here are just a foretaste of what's to come when Kosovo's refugees begin to return home. 800,000 were forced from Kosovo by the Serbs. They are in exile and in waiting. Then, on the outskirts of Prizren, Kosovo's rebels appeared on the streets. Men who've fought the Serbs for a year, reappearing now that the Serb military has gone. Tension is still high here tonight. The war is over, but Prizren remains a perilous place. Bill Neely, ITN, Prizren, Kosovo.
It's on the way out, so it will be also...
We have to check the Exodus road, yeah. So what we need to do is get you a safe road, but one will not block the VJ and move departures. So if you go...
United Nations and NATO liaison officers clearing the first UN convoy to go west in Kosovo out of Pristina. The mission is to establish the immediate food needs of the 500,000 displaced ethnic Albanians still inside Kosovo. Within 2 miles of the city centre, freshly burning buildings, a stark reminder that whilst NATO may control the capital, its writ does not yet run here. Serb soldiers were billeted here for a day. Their bread lies uneaten on the kitchen table. They left, defiling the wall with a knife through a naked model, and then torched the place. Still in pursuit of the displaced Kosovars and their food needs, every mile we took, Serb military were in control. But occasionally there were tangible signs that they are going. The fires are theirs, wreaking still more devastation even as they leave. Our UN convoy was suddenly halted to permit the most infamous Serb paramilitaries of all to draw across our path, crammed into buses on their way to Belgrade. General Jackson told us today that it's not his job to have them questioned for war crimes before they go. 20 miles out of Pristina, we found them. Behind a wire fence, some of the 30,000 displaced ethnic Albanians in this one town alone.
It's only corn that they're eating right now.
The UN food officials moved amongst them, making their assessment.
No, it's over. It's over. It's over. It's almost over.
I want to see what you're eating.
Yes, I'm telling you now.
Let's go and see what you're eating.
In this house, all this house, are 175 men. All are women and children.
In this one house, 175 people, no bread for 2 weeks, just sour sweet corn.
Do you have to drink rainwater?
We must drink that water because we don't have any others.
So what's the UN going to do about immediate water and flour supplies?
We are planning to bring down a truck this afternoon, and then we'll do a very quick delivery here and can distribute wheat flour and some HCR, the humanitarian daily rations.
That's emergency aid. And then infrastructurally, what can we do about the water?
The water, we would have to speak with other NGOs.
Infrastructurally, NATO bombed the power station that made the electricity, that pumped the water. The consequences are awful for the very people they bombed to save. And even here, a man comes up to tell us of his sister and 63 others who were taken into the forest and summarily shot at 5 o'clock just over 30 days ago by Serb paramilitaries. So it is that as we leave, the children chant NATO, NATO. But this is just one town, the first town to the west of Pristina. There are so very many more yet to be reached and assessed. The Serb military is definitely on the move tonight. This assortment of forces stretches 10 kilometers. Some party to identifiable crimes, others simply foot soldiers in Milosevic's cause. But their departure is generating a new climate of fear for Serbs left behind. The presence of NATO is enough to keep some from fleeing, but many others are setting out for the sanctuary of Serbia. These were the ethnic Albanian houses we filmed yesterday, set alight by departing Serbs. The Canadians have turned up now, evidence of NATO spreading control out from its secure base in Pristina. The Serbs are already right out of this part of the zone. British forces are also establishing prominent positions in Serb areas of Pristina.
precisely because it is these people who are now feeling besieged. In this suburb of the city, the Serbs are in the majority. They told me they had no intention of leaving and felt protected by NATO. I think some Serbs are leaving, she told me, because they're related to the paramilitaries. I'm certainly not leaving, said another. The other Serbs here offered their warmest handshakes. But on the other side of the city, we found an old man who is the last Serb in the village of Matachani, from which 40 Serb families have fled in the past 10 days. And even whilst we were there, the British arrived in pursuit of an incident nearby.
From what we can gather, although we haven't got our interpreter here, and that's where we were just headed, there was a gun team, if you like, of what they claim to be KLA, driving around in a green car. We've seen that, who crashed this car, fired off a salvo, and then ran away in a southerly direction.
House-to-house searching by the paratroopers revealed 2 more isolated groups of Serbs still here in hiding. A jeep with reportedly 4 Albanian gangsters had come through here firing indiscriminately. A pool of blood in the hay. And within an hour, the fearful Serb family at the end of the village is packing its tractor and trailer to leave their home. This is how these awful family exits are built. An incident in a climate of fear, and within minutes the possessions are readied for escape. An hour ago they were farming as they have for generations. Now they were setting out to become a refugee statistic, taking their chance on the open road to Serbia. The Russians will have to play more of a role here if law-abiding Serbs are to be reassured. Camera shy, we met them, still billeted at the airport, playing no role. The Western powers will try to establish that role when they meet this weekend.
Today, the survivors of the horror of the past 3 months, people who had lain low in hiding from the Serbs, were meeting each other for the first time in the new wasteland that is their town. Fatima lived through it all.
All these shops were burned for 4.5 hours. The first night, it means 24th March, as soon as the NATO started bombing. At 24, it means 12 o'clock midnight, as soon as the NATO stopped, they started at the beginning of the street to burn.
Fatima, tell me, those of you who did stay behind, how did you survive for those 2-3 months?
Oh, well, you see, nightmare. Every moment I was waiting to come the police at my home to burn and to kill me. They picked up all the young people, old people, even the women and children, and they divided. Women from the men, the women they just sent to one factory, and the boys they sent. Even today, we don't know where are they.
Just then, we met a group of women who pleaded with us to find out what had happened to their sons. They said 1,700 men were taken by the Serbs. They've just begun collecting the names of the missing men of Đakovica. Relatives have been coming to the office with rumors that their sons and husbands are being held prisoner, perhaps in Serbia, perhaps in northern Kosovo. This is the list that's been typed up so far of the men that are missing from this town alone. All of them are said to have been taken away between the 9th and the 11th of May. From a quick glance, I can see that the youngest name is 17 years old and the oldest is 50. The registration centre in Đakovica was run by the KLA, as seemed to be the town hall, which had not been damaged during the conflict. We saw the KLA manning their own checkpoints outside town, while NATO soldiers looked on. Much the same tacit acceptance of the KLA's armed presence by NATO is taking place in the centre of Prizren. The former rebels staged a triumphal procession through the centre today. They now appear to be accepted as the legitimate authority in Kosovo's second biggest city. The local KLA commander met a German NATO officer and made reassuring noises.
There is no shooting.
No shooting?
No shooting, just positioning, very controlled situation.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
But the fighters themselves show no inclination to disarm.
In my opinion, the KLA should continue its ability to defend our people. One day, the NATO forces will leave, so we must make sure we do not have problems like the ones we have just lived through.
Without any resistance from NATO, the KLA has occupied the military barracks vacated by the last of the Serb forces. The German commander here says his men will only disarm the KLA if they're obstructive. It's a long way from a peace deal which has Kosovo still in Yugoslavia and the KLA demilitarized. Gabirado, Channel 4 News, Prizren.
Lined up to leave, they sang the song of Greater Serbia and they promised they'd be back.
1 month. Or one month.
You
We'll
will
be back.
return?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. Because this is us.
What is you? Kosovo?
Yes. Serbian land.
All day long as the deadline approaches, the convoys have snaked north from the capital, heading back to Serbia, back home. Most soldiers seem happy enough to be out of the bombing. Out in the open and retreating, the hardware which for 11 weeks had been hidden from the bombs in schools, housing estates, hospitals. We travelled north with one convoy out of the NATO zone, where some clearly weren't having the smoothest of exits. We're now standing well north of NATO lines in the countryside to the north of Pristina. The withdrawal clearly is going on in an orderly fashion, but as one lieutenant in the Yugoslav army put it, we're sad to be leaving Kosovo, we're sad the war is over, but it's NATO, what can we do? Back in town, British troops liaised with Serb military police units.
You leaving today?
Danas.
Yeah.
Go.
Oh, you go today. You
Yes,
heading
yes.
north, back to Serbia?
Yes, yes.
Okay then. Right, as soon as I can, mate. Okay.
It is not just the army and military police who are leaving, the civil police are out too. So, mingling in the convoys, Serb civilians who no longer feel safe, escaping north, just as returning Albanians come in from the south. General Jackson's advice to Serb civilians is to stay calm and to stay put.
And remain in their homes. Do not think that they have to leave Kosovo because of this situation. This overall situation has caused enough refugees already.
Yet this war against people and their property is ending as it began, with the backdrop of burning houses. From the air, an RAF helicopter quarters villages. Here, Serbs have commandeered Albanian houses to escape the bombing and are now torching them as they leave. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Pristina.
Word is travelling fast among the Kosovar refugees, and they are not waiting around. Huge bottlenecks are building up on the Macedonian border as those who've heard their town or village is now safe head home. This is only the beginning of the great return, just the trickle before the flood. This was always one of NATO's biggest fears, that long before they had secured Kosovo, before it was safe for people, before even most of the Serbs had left, refugees would start pouring back home. But while NATO may not welcome it, they're not going to do anything to stop it. That, they say, is not what they came here for. Those without transport simply walk 20, 30 miles or more in some cases. They walked out of Kosovo at the point of a gun. They say they're quite happy to walk back in freedom. We took one refugee, 24-year-old Buce Laki, back to her hometown, finding friends and relations not seen in almost 3 months. But she was really looking for her grandmother, who'd had to stay behind. And there in the main street, sitting in the back of a tractor, she found her. The family had had no news of her. They'd had no idea if she'd even survived the occupation. Then we went to Buce's house. She'd had no idea if it had been burned or looted, but miraculously it was undamaged. The Serbs had been through the place. but her most precious possessions were still there.
My books. I am surprised to find them. I miss them very much. My flowers and my books and, oh, of course, my home. But we had news that they had grabbed everything and that lots of houses have been burned here, but my house wasn't. And then, well.
Buche and her family have survived okay. Other refugees heading home today don't know yet if they have been so lucky. But they are going home, and they believe it is to a better future. James Mates, ITN, with the returning refugees in southern Kosovo.
Good evening. Yet more evidence emerged today of the scale of the atrocities committed in Kosovo. Hundreds more bodies have been found in several areas of the province as Serb troops continued their pullout. Today, American forces arrested 2 Serbs who will be investigated for possible war crimes. Our Europe correspondent Bill Neely has visited one of the sites where a massacre took place and reports on the misery it's left behind.
This is Suvoreka, where 50,000 people once lived. It's destroyed and it's empty. When NATO began bombing, Serbian police and paramilitaries ran amok here. I counted 3 mass graves on one small stretch of road. More than 200 people are buried here. There are fresh graveyards dotted all around this town. 36 graves in this one, but each grave containing more than one person. 2 here, 3 there, 5, 9 over there. Sanja Gashi came home to Suvoreka from Albania today to find her son's blood-stained hat and his grave in the back garden. He was shot in front of his children by Serb paramilitaries who murdered, as they called, at every house on the street. The refugees are returning to a very different Kosovo, where the KLA rebels, not the Serbs, patrol the streets and share the streets with NATO soldiers, who for now are making no attempt to disarm them. Both say they're in control. So you say you're 100% in control, they say they're in control.
Exactly. What is the wrong thing?
Well, 2 people can't be 100% in control,
Yes,
so someone
can.
has to give.
They can.
They can't, and soon the refugees will witness another shift of power, as they will witness other sites, and watch as more proof is uncovered of the rape and pillage of a province the Serbs said was the heart of their civilization.
British troops have been briefed to expect some pretty unpleasant discoveries in Kosovo. Today, what they stumbled across in an abandoned police station was both disturbing and macabre.
Box full of goodies here with tricks of trade, knuckle dusters and that.
Soldiers of the parachute regiment who'd been the first ones in here walked me down into a basement room that bore the hallmarks of a torture chamber. The things they found down here were a very long way from the tools of civilized policing.
Yeah.
And knuckle dusters again?
Yeah, this is like part of the kosh, this one, the small one, obviously you can seal it.
I see. Axe and a machete?
Yes, for that, that's just... Have you seen that coming towards you?
From the clothing left on the floor, it appears that women and possibly children too had been held in this basement. That would certainly fit with the accounts of people who claim to have been held here.
Refugees fleeing this country told many tales of torture and killings at the hands of the police. At the very end of the 20th century in Europe, it was hard to believe those tales weren't exaggerated. Discoveries like these suggest that the very worst of them may well have been true.
The evidence will be preserved by the British Army and passed on to the War Crimes Tribunal.
When you go down to the cellar and see some of the things down there, I mean, a box of knuckle dusters, I mean, what organisation that has any regard for human life and decent law and order requires knuckle dusters?
It is perhaps not surprising that tens of thousands of Serbs are choosing to leave Kosovo. The numbers have been building each day since NATO arrived, but today the roads were choked with cars heading north. NATO's promises that they are impartial, that they can protect everyone, are not, it seems, being believed. It is a mirror of the great Albanian exodus of the past 3 months. The regime in Serbia sowed the seeds of ethnic hatred in Kosovo. It is now their own people who are reaping the harvest. James Mates, ITN, Pristina, Kosovo.
The burning of Kosovo continues this evening. These are Serb homes burnt by their owners as they flee the province. Today, British tanks were heading north in Kosovo, towards the Serbian border and towards another confrontation with Serb forces. The British troops entered the town of Podjevo just after dawn. Albanians who've been living in hiding and in fear for months rushed onto the streets to greet them. But the Serb army had yet to leave. They seemed surprised by the arrival of British forces and tried to block their way. They also tried to stop Albanian locals laying siege to a Serb barracks. These were tense moments. Eventually, the Serbs relented, and a British officer tried to persuade the Albanians to get off the streets. No one knows how many died in the ethnic cleansing in Podjevo, but in surrounding villages, bodies and fresh graves are everywhere. Locals say scores of bodies were buried here by Serbs who arrived in trucks and a bulldozer. We were also taken to a farm cellar with decomposed body parts and clothing scattered inside. The children were ushered away. The bodies of 6 people were dumped here, we were told.
As British forces move north through Kosovo, so more evidence of burning, killing and looting comes to light. We're now only a few miles from the border with Serbia, and by the weekend NATO forces should control the whole of Kosovo.
This evening, the Serb army was finally pulling out of Podjevo, leaving behind a town free of oppression, but also a population who will never come to terms with what happened in these killing fields of Kosovo. Mark Austin, ITN, Podjevo.
On the streets of Pristina, Serbs and Albanians continue their blood feud. A Serb gunman, his target an Albanian man. British troops were on the scene in seconds. Their presence, the only thing preventing another murder in broad daylight.
The gun's down there behind the car!
A second Serb gunman runs towards the Albanian, only to discover his target is holding a grenade, with the pin pulled out. He beats a hasty retreat. The 2 gunmen escaped. The grenade was made safe, but this is what the troops here are still dealing with on a daily basis.
Both sides are under the impression that they are out to kill each other. In most cases, and I've got to stress this, that is not true. But in some cases, as you've just witnessed today, it is.
This morning, the main body of the British Army here was making its final push northwards to the very borders of Kosovo. From this evening, the entire province is firmly in NATO hands. This is the Serbian border. It is the British Army's final objective. They are here on time. More importantly, perhaps, the Yugoslav army are leaving ahead of schedule. As early as tomorrow lunchtime, Kosovo should be free of all Serb military units. They stand defiantly on their side of the border, flags clearly visible from the British positions, the silence occasionally punctuated with the crackle of gunfire. But Challenger tanks now stand sentry on the main roads into Kosovo. Within hours, NATO expects to declare mission accomplished. James Mates, ITN, on the Serbian border.
It's the biggest war crimes investigation so far in Kosovo, and it may be the most important, because the victims of the Velika Kruša massacre are named in the war crimes charge against President Milošević. The British forensic team set to work immediately, taking evidence and photographs at the first of several sites here.
At the moment, we're looking for anything that indicates a massacre took place. The eyewitness accounts suggest something took place here. We need to corroborate that in order to provide evidence for the Commission at The Hague.
They are working now at a house where the charred bodies of around 20 people lie. But as the survivors of the Serb attack return, more bodies are found. I was shown 3 found in recent days. 2, a father and son, were tied to this tree before being shot and burned.
From the suburb, 25 or more people has been killed.
People who you know personally?
Yeah, who I know personally.
Only a few of the 200 or so victims have a grave. War crimes investigators already know a lot about what happened here, but finding out exactly who did the killing and who gave the orders, then tracking them down, arresting and prosecuting them will be a difficult, if not impossible, task. President Milošević himself tops the list of those wanted for this crime when Serb police and paramilitaries ran amok. The graffiti the Serbs left for the villagers reads, "If you're not good, we'll be back. Tonight, it is the war crimes investigators who are back on their trail.
Good evening. The last remaining Serb troops in Kosovo finally pulled out of the province today, signalling a formal end to NATO's air campaign. But the soldiers left behind them a new bout of burning and looting. This time it was the turn of ethnic Albanians to exact revenge on Serb families. Here's Bill Neely, who's in southern Kosovo.
This woman's son, a Serb, has been shot dead by Albanians. She's distraught because she and 3,000 other Serbs from her town are now ready to flee for their lives.
Everybody go. We must go. We don't want to go, but we must go.
They're scared the Albanians of the KLA will kill them, and they don't feel protected by German troops inexperienced at peacekeeping.
No, we can't trust NATO because they work with KLA.
Only one thing will stop these people leaving. Only one thing will make them feel safe. It's not NATO, it's the arrival here of Russian troops. They've been told that several hundred Russians will be deployed here soon.
We think it's Russian soldiers protect us.
These Serbs are terrified. The killing can start all over again, he says, but I don't want to leave my land. Down the hill, the men they're scared of are leaving. These KLA soldiers were disarmed and disbanded this morning. But fear, like hatred here, is persistent. And now it's ordinary Serbs who are the victims. Bill Neely, ITN, Orahovac.
There were similar stories in other parts of Kosovo where there's been more arson and extensive looting. Columns of tractors have been seen carting Serbian possessions away. James Mates reports.
This is the Serb village of Glace, which we found this morning being comprehensively looted and burned by ethnic Albanians. We were told the Serb population had been driven out last night. The village is barely 10 miles away from NATO's headquarters in the capital, Pristina. This clearly is payback time, the Albanians reclaiming what they believe they are owed. It is obvious now why the Serb population left in such a hurry. But more importantly, this is something that NATO promised to prevent. Barely half a mile down the road, we found 3 British armoured vehicles parked up and idle. They knew what was happening, but had been told not to intervene. French troops in armoured cars spent several hours watching the looting and burning, but that was all they did. They even kept thoughtfully to the side of the road to allow loot-laden tractors to pass by. What they saw was hardly a quick smash and grab raid. Everything was being stolen, from roof tiles to house bricks, stacks of firewood, supplies of animal feed. And when there was nothing left to steal, the arson began. At one stage, British troops did enter the village, but despite their armoured vehicles and heavy weapons, they felt unable to take on unarmed civilians.
With the means that we have available to us, it's impossible to actually stop them setting fire to the buildings and removing the items.
NATO headquarters in Pristina had known all day what was going on. They have more than 20,000 troops at their disposal, but they chose not to act.
The decision of the commander on the ground was to avoid any danger to life and limb, was to accept some destruction of property at the time.
More than 50,000 Serbs have already fled Kosovo. They left saying they didn't believe NATO's promises to protect them. Nothing that happened here today has proved them wrong. James Mates, ITN, in the village of Glace, Kosovo.
President Clinton and President Yeltsin shook hands today, ending the strained relations which developed between Russia and the US over the Kosovo crisis. The two leaders met at the G8 summit of world leaders in Cologne. Our political editor Michael Brunson was there.
All eyes here were on President Yeltsin after the disagreement now resolved over the Russian troops in Kosovo. At the airport, Mr. Yeltsin seemed to want to talk to a group of journalists. His aides plainly had other ideas. In the city of Cologne later, someone asked Mr. Yeltsin what he'd be discussing with the other world leaders. Many things, he said. His behaviour is clearly awkward. After a bear hug outside for his host, Chancellor Schroeder, he decided once he was inside that a spot of arm wrestling with Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was in order. To the other slightly bemused leaders, the repairing of relations with the Russians generally was more important than such antics. So his declaration to Tony Blair that he was, quote, back among friends, and a slightly chaotic meeting between the Americans and the Russians later, with Mr. Yeltsin holding forth to Mr. Clinton, was seen as important hatchet-bearing signals.
I think the coming together is not simply warm words. It is based on a genuine sense of where our mutual interest for the future lies.
The Prime Minister also confirmed that the name of Paddy Ashdown will go forward with his consent as a candidate for the job of the UN Commissioner to oversee the reconstruction of Kosovo. What may stop Mr. Ashdown getting the job, however, is the feeling perhaps internationally that the British shouldn't be running everything in Kosovo, or the fact that it may take a top-serving military officer to do the job. Michael Brunson, ITN, Cologne.
Good evening. 2 British soldiers from the Gurkha Regiment were killed today in Kosovo, the first NATO troops to die since the start of the conflict. The men were caught in an explosion as they cleared a school building of mines and ammunition near Pristina. There are suggestions these soldiers may have been disposing of old NATO cluster bombs. It happened on the day that NATO called an official end to its war campaign. James Mates reports.
The Gurkhas were clearing mines and ammunition from this schoolhouse when the explosion happened. It is exactly the danger the army has been warning of since it moved into Kosovo 10 days ago. When we were there late this afternoon, British soldiers, Gurkha engineers among them, were carrying out a controlled explosion on part of an unexploded NATO cluster bomb left over from the air campaign. It is believed the 2 who died may also have been dealing with unexploded NATO munitions. The Gurkhas had moved into Kosovo with the first wave of British troops. The engineers, wearing dark blue berets that day, were there to deal with the threat of mines or booby traps. Highly dangerous work that has now claimed the first NATO casualties in Kosovo since the conflict began.
This tragic incident underlines the dangers that face KFOR troops as we work to create a safe and secure environment for the return of the displaced peoples of Kosovo. Troops already take all possible precautions, but the nature of military operations inevitably involves dangers.
It will strike British forces as doubly tragic that their first casualties should come on the very day that NATO officially secured Kosovo. The Serbs have confirmed that their forces are now out. The ethnic Albanian KLA have undertaken that they will disarm and demilitarize. The deal, signed in the early hours of this morning, makes NATO the sole civil and military power in the province. KLA fighters will stop wearing uniforms and return to civilian life within 90 days.
KFOR is here to keep the peace, to provide military security, and we will not tolerate any violation of the undertaking now in force.
NATO firmly in control, but made brutally aware tonight that their success here has not come without cost. James Mates, ITN, Kosovo.
A formal end to the war may have been declared, but for many people the violence continues. There have been more attacks on Serb villages and Serb civilians who say that they're the victims of Albanian hatred. Here's Bill Neely.
NATO troops on patrol in a Serb village today, but they're too late. Albanians got here first and burned it. It's payback time in Kosovo, and the Serbs are on the receiving end. Serbs are fleeing and Serbs are hiding. 300 in the grounds of a monastery. Albanians ordered this woman out of her home, saying, if you come back, we'll slit your throat. They burned her house. Serbs feel there's no law here now, no justice.
Is it justice? Clinton said to American people, Serbs doing this, Serbs doing that, terrible things. Maybe some Serbs did that, but Serbs are victims too.
They were once a powerful minority. They now feel powerless, threatened and trapped. Not least because hundreds of Serbs who fled Kosovo are now being sent back by their government. President Milošević demanding that they stay here. 3 Serbs were murdered together near the monastery at the weekend. Serb bishops and a British army chaplain are now touring villages, trying to persuade Serbs to stay in Kosovo.
In peace and in security,
difficult, isn't it? But I hope so, and I hope pray so. And that's what they're all about here. They're trying to re-establish the idea of the brotherhood of man here, irrespective of the faith that people come from.
Not much sign of the brotherhood of man nearby in Peć city centre. Albanians looting Serb shops, taking home £100 bags of sugar under the noses of Italian and British NATO troops who did nothing to stop it. These Albanians came 10 miles for a day out looting Serb shops, and down the road the Brotherhood of Man took another blow. We found these Serb women looting Albanian homes.
You have to turn it in. It's over now.
NATO troops are taking things too, confiscating weapons from the Albanian KLA, who must be disarmed in a month. But that's not good enough, not now at least, for the Serbs living in fear, in a land that's theirs too, where nothing these days is black and white anymore. Bill Neely, ITN, Peć, Kosovo.
He is the first Western leader to come to the Balkans since NATO took over Kosovo, the man who can take much of the credit for the success of the air campaign, a man now hailed as a national saviour by the Kosovar Albanians. For President Clinton, the suffering of these people was the justification for NATO's actions. Today, accompanied by his wife Hillary and daughter Chelsea, he heard firsthand what they'd been through and what they'd lost.
I have nothing left, no house left. I'm so sorry.
As he went through the camp, he stopped to talk to individual families, always seeking to reassure them that Western help would continue.
Now we have to rebuild Kosovo. Make sure your kids are okay.
And when he moved to the makeshift podium to speak, he can rarely have felt more certain of a good reception.
We're proud of what we did because we think it's what America stands for, that no one ever, ever should be punished and discriminated against or killed or uprooted because of their religion or their ethnic heritage. The United States did not act alone. All of our NATO allies felt the same way. Thank you, and God bless you.
The refugee exodus and the creation of these camps were an unintended consequence of NATO's bombing campaign, but these people don't blame the president for it. Quite the opposite. They appear to genuinely believe that he and NATO have given them their country back. The warmth of the response here left the president visibly moved. It can only have reinforced his view that the Western alliance did the right thing. Other leaders will follow. The Foreign Secretary Robin Cook is visiting Kosovo tomorrow. All will be well received, but perhaps none quite like this. James Mates, ITN, with the refugees in Macedonia.
A waiter, a doorman, and a professor. All of them Serbs, all of them shot dead at Pristina University last night. The Albanians are coming back to Kosovo, and some are out to settle old scores.
I'm shocked and I'm scared. My plans before that murder was done was to stay here, but now I'm not really sure.
We believe at the moment, but obviously pending investigation, that perhaps some Albanians came in here and took 3 Serbs down to the basement, males, and then shot them.
The dean, also a Serb, says now he might shut down the entire faculty. That's the ugly reality against which NATO did their walkabout in Pristina this afternoon. Secretary-General Javier Solana lapping it up. Spokesman Jamie Shea in an affectionate Albanian arm lock. Certainly the war has been won, but Kosovo is far from peaceful. Across the country, a siege mentality is developing fast in Serb communities. In northern Kosovo, Serbs demand and get French military protection for the funeral of 2 more Serb men shot dead.
Because the name Sasha Nikolic and what happened to him will now be known not just by the friends and family who attended his funeral here, but by Serbs for miles around in this region, and will be used as evidence by them as to why these 2 communities cannot now live together for the foreseeable future.
And after the funeral, they insisted on a military escort through the next Albanian village where the men were shot. We took the same route. Serbs stopped us and asked us to escort them through the village. And they're now saying that the only way they can get out of the village safely is if we escort them, just because they've seen we've got an armoured Land Rover, just because the next village is Albanian. Our Serb translator carries a handgun and refuses to get out of the vehicle in any Albanian village. We took a Serb couple back to see their wrecked home. The looters' graffiti read, Ditan Yakiri now owns this house, an Albanian name. To our amazement, we noticed the looters were still here. Seeing the owner, they made an unhurried exit. Milan Krzic said he'd tried to protect Albanians during the war, but now the KLA had made him too into a refugee.
They were coming up. My wife came running and warned me. There were 10 or 15 KLA men on their way. I wasn't going to wait for them, so I escaped.
And escaped like so many more Serbs to the east bank of the river Ibar in Mitrovica, a city now divided. Serbs on the east bank, Albanians on the west. Mitrovica Serbs say it's become a last stand.
Now we decide, don't leave this part, because this is the last step for Serbian people in Kosovo.
And NATO simply cannot deal with this. True, its soldiers arrest a few here and there, but the looting and burning is continuing daily, as are the murders. And it makes the spectacle of Cook, Solana, Shea, Jackson and the rest parading the streets in triumph look a little premature. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Kosovo.
Looting Serb shops today in Pristina in broad daylight. Kosovo is filling up again, with people who now bear strong hatreds and are seeking revenge for what's been done to them. According to the United Nations, 48,000 people crossed back into Kosovo yesterday. Many of them have come here to Pristina, among them people from the country who now have no homes, as well as members of the Albanian mafia. It's a powerful cocktail in a city where crime has always been endemic, but now it's the army and the Royal Military Police who are trying to keep a lid on it. They've caught these boys red-handed trying to break into a flat. It's something that's going on all over the city.
Tell them they're being arrested for breaking entry.
Serbs and Albanians alike queue outside the station run by the British military police. They've come to report everything from stolen cars to mass murder.
We police by consent. The majority of people here want to be policed and want to return to normality, and it's that we really do play on.
In a town outside Pristina, a man is lying dead in his own home. He's a Serb. He's been beaten up, stabbed and strangled with his own curtains.
Never in my whole time in the army I've never seen anything like this.
And policing won't get any easier in the coming months in a country where so many are bent on violent revenge. Joe Andrews, ITN, Kosovo. Every day, villagers from Račak come up here to spend time with their dead. It's only since NATO forces arrived in Kosovo that they've been able to do their mourning in public. In the past 5 months, this community has been scattered across the world. Only now are they returning. There isn't a family in the village that escaped harm on that terrible January morning. People like the Mustafas, who are now a household of women. At dawn on a winter's day, they found themselves directly in the Serb police's line of fire. Zulfia Mustafa told me her father, her uncle, her father-in-law and her young sister-in-law were all shot right here. The women have only been home a few days, trying to make the house habitable again. They say they found several syringes, which they believe the police used to psych themselves up for the massacre. Somehow these people seem able to accept all that has happened. God and NATO have saved us, Zulfia says. Now my father's blood has been shed for freedom, and for that reason we don't regret his death. After the killings, the village was deserted by its people. Now slowly life is returning, but no one can forget that over 200 children here have lost their fathers. The dead of Ratchak still have a powerful role in this, and they may yet succeed in bringing Milošević to justice, because what happened here forms the central part of the indictment against him for war crimes. Joe Andrews, ITN, Ratchak. For the Kosovar Albanians, this was an evening of total joy. For them, it spells the end of a 10-year-old nightmare. No more ethnic cleansing, no more massacres, a chance to live without fear.
We are very happy and we say very much thank you to NATO for all this.
With over 3/4 of the country now home, thousands of people paraded and chanted their way through the streets of Pristina.
NATO! NATO! NATO!
This is the first chance the Kosovar Albanians have had to celebrate the peace. What they're marking is the day 9 years ago when their political leaders first declared independence. It's a day they now believe they've finally seen. A hated statue of a Serb writer was pulled down and attacked, and the man who is now likely to lead this country, the KLA chief Hashim Thaçi, was mobbed and applauded. And inevitably late tonight, the noise of guns being fired in the air rang through the city. It's a sound and a sight that will do nothing to reassure the remaining Serb minority.
Continuing grief of Kosovo 6 months on.
The ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monahan.
Good evening. The people of Kosovo are facing a wretched winter after NATO's war on their behalf. Our senior correspondent, Mark Austin, who covered the conflict, has been back 6 months on to find many people still waiting for adequate food and shelter and still no peace between Albanian and Serb. This is his special report.
We found Kosovo in the grip of the first snow of a bleak Balkan winter. Like hundreds of thousands of Albanian refugees, the Sadeo family is back home. But in truth, it is no home at all. In temperatures below freezing, even the most basic chores are a struggle. These people were promised fuel and materials to rebuild their ruined house, but 6 months on, and in this and many other villages, no help has arrived. The UN relief operation is bogged down by disorganisation and delay. NATO forces are being asked to assist the aid distribution. Tracked military vehicles, often the only means to reach the more remote areas. It's slow going. For the aid agencies here, it's a race against time, and a race they are losing. 6 months on, Kosovo remains dangerous and divided. In one town, barbed wire still separates Albanians from the few Serbs left. Serbs who in Pristina count increasingly on the round-the-clock protection of British troops. Last week, an elderly Serb couple were shot dead in this apartment. Albanian gunmen are blamed. They've also threatened other Serbs, including Sunny Brazera, a young single mother who lives with her baby Jack and 8-year-old son Ivan. They've only ventured out 4 times in 5 months. When we were there, Ivan made the trip to school for the first time since the war ended. It was an extraordinary operation. He and 25 other Serb children were gathered together by armed soldiers. They were herded into armoured Land Rovers for the 10-mile journey to a Serb enclave. It is a frightening way to go to school, but for Serb children in Pristina, it is the only way.
And so these are the lengths they have to go to ensure the safety of Serb school children in Pristina. 6 months on, and Tony Blair's declared aim of a genuinely multi-ethnic Kosovo is simply a world away.
In fields across the province lie the anti-tank mines intended for NATO's invasion force. The ground invasion never happened, but the mines remain, hidden now more than ever by winter snow. Albanian women have joined the demining teams, but this is a job that will take years. And for thousands of women here, it is the war with no end. 6 months on, their husbands are still missing.
My husband and 2 children.
Pranvira Sharani doesn't know whether her husband and 5 other men from her family are dead or languishing in Serb prisons. Her neighbour is also missing her husband. On the eve of the new millennium, this remains a desperate place. Mark Austin, ITN, Kosovo.
We're ending our programme this evening with the last of our reports from Kosovo, 6 months after the end of the war. As we reported earlier in the week, for many people, peace has not brought an end to the pain and the misery. But for some, as ITN's Mark Austin found out, life has improved immeasurably.
Through the ruined villages of central Kosovo we drove to discover the fate of a family separated by a savage war. It was 7 months ago when we found 9-year-old Ardita Hadini crying in the rain on the Kosovo-Albanian border. She and her 5-year-old sister had lost their mother when they were forced from their home by Serb paramilitaries who took their father away at gunpoint. 6 weeks later, we tracked down Ardita's mother to a refugee camp on the other side of Albania. She was reunited with her children.
Hi, how are you?
Last week, we found them again. They were all in good spirits, and this is the reason why.
Happy to see you.
The father they were convinced was dead had come home.
Did he think he would see his children again?
Never in my life. I never believed that I will see them again. For my 2 daughters, I never thought that in my life I will see them again.
He walked me through the ruins of their village, destroyed by Serb troops, and told me his story, how he'd been held for several days by his captors who had threatened to cut his throat. He'd only survived by paying money. They let him go, and he spent weeks hiding in the mountains. Now he's home trying to rebuild a life with his family. But in Kosovo today, it is not easy. There is no power and no running water. Little aid has reached them in this remote village. They survive on whatever they can muster. And they're living in one room of a house still to be rebuilt. His hope for his children now is that the future has more to offer than the past. I can't bear to look back at what we've been through, he told me.
It is an untypical story in Kosovo, a story with a happy ending after a brutal war that has torn so many families apart.
We left the Hajdini children with paper and pens. They're about to begin school again. A new generation, looking to the new millennium, and hopefully a new start for Kosovo. Mark Austin, ITN, Žetak, Kosovo.